Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here, every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous actress, Marina Gregg, hosts a grand fête at Gossington Hall, but a deadly cocktail laced with cyanide claims the life of an innocent fan, Heather Badcock. As whispers of murder ripple through the village, the sharp-eyed Miss Jane Marple uncovers a chilling truth. A chance encounter in 1949, where Heather unknowingly passed German measles to a pregnant Marina, led to a tragedy that fueled a vengeful plot. With anonymous letters, a second poisoning, and a household unraveling under suspicion, Miss Marple sets a trap to reveal a killer driven by grief. Can she unravel the web of secrets before more lives are lost? Chapter 1. The Fête at Gossington Hall. The village of St. Mary Mead had always been a place where change came slowly, if at all. Nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, its thatched cottages and winding lanes seemed impervious to the rush of the modern world. But on this bright July afternoon in 1962, even St. Mary Mead felt the stir of something extraordinary. Gossington Hall, the stately home that had long been the pride of the Bantry family, now belonged to Marina Gregg, the film star whose name evoked images of glamour and distant Hollywood lights. The annual fête, traditionally a modest affair of jam stalls and coconut shies, had taken on a new luster under her patronage. The gates of the hall stood wide open, welcoming villagers and visitors alike. Lawns stretched out like emerald carpets, dotted with colorful tents and booths, where local women sold handmade crafts and home-baked scones. Children darted about, clutching sticky buns, while the brass band from the neighboring town played cheerful tunes that floated on the warm breeze. Overhead, the sky was a flawless blue, unbroken by even the hint of a cloud. Miss Jane Marple sat in a shady corner near the rose garden, her frail figure ensconced in a wicker chair borrowed from the vicarage. At her age, she would not admit to being quite as old as the villagers whispered. She found such outings a trifle exhausting, yet she would not miss them for the world. Her blue eyes, faded but remarkably acute, scanned the scene with the quiet absorption of one who had spent a lifetime observing human nature. She adjusted her spectacles and smoothed the folds of her black silk dress, her knitting bag at her feet, though today she had no intention of working on the pale pink wool that was destined to become a baby's jacket. Not far away, Dolly Bantry, the former mistress of Gossington Hall, was holding court among a cluster of old friends. She had sold the place to Marina Gregg after Colonel Bantry's death, and though she now lived in a smaller cottage on the estate, she retained a proprietary interest in the old house. "It's all very well having film stars about," Dolly was saying in her booming voice, "but I do miss the old days. Still, Marina's done wonders with the place. Gardens never looked better." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Dolly had always been forthright, a quality that often led to amusing indiscretions. Her gaze shifted to the terrace, where Marina Gregg herself stood, the undisputed center of attention. The actress was a vision in a flowing gown of silver chiffon that caught the sunlight like ripples on water. Her hair, a cascade of golden waves, framed a face that had graced countless magazine covers, high cheekbones, luminous eyes, and a smile that could melt the sternest heart. Yet, as she greeted guests with practiced grace, Miss Marple detected a subtle tension in her posture, a fleeting shadow in her expression that suggested not all was well beneath the surface. Marina's husband, Jason Rudd, hovered nearby, a tall, dark-haired man with the intense eyes of a film director. He was known for his brooding genius, and today he seemed particularly watchful, his hand occasionally touching his wife's arm in a gesture of support. The couple had moved to St. Mary Mead, seeking respite from the frenetic pace of their professional lives, or so the gossip went. But Miss Marple wondered if peace was truly what they had found. By the tea tent, a lively group had gathered. Among them was Heather Badcock, the energetic secretary of the Saint. Mary Mead Women's Institute. Heather was in her early 30s, with a round, pleasant face and an irrepressible enthusiasm that made her a fixture at every village event. Dressed in a floral print frock and sensible shoes, she was chatting animatedly to a circle of admirers, her voice carrying over the hum of the crowd. "Oh, I've been such a fan of Miss Gregg since I was a girl," she declared, her eyes sparkling. "Remember that film where she played the tragic queen? Simply marvelous. And now to have her living right here, it's like a dream." Miss Marple knew Heather well enough. The woman meant no harm, but her zeal could sometimes border on the overwhelming. As if drawn by the mention of her name, Marina Gregg approached the group, Jason at her side. The actress extended a hand to Heather, her smile warm and inviting. "How kind of you to say so," Marina said, her voice a melodious contralto that hinted at years of stage training. "I'm delighted to meet such an ardent admirer." Heather flushed with pleasure, shaking the offered hand vigorously. "You wouldn't remember, but we met once before, years ago, at a charity gala in London. I was feeling quite under the weather that day, a bit of a cold or something, but I simply had to come and see you. You were so gracious." For an instant, Marina's face seemed to freeze, her eyes widening in what might have been recognition or alarm. But the moment passed so swiftly that Miss Marple, watching from afar, wondered if she had imagined it. Jason stepped forward, murmuring something about refreshments, and a waiter appeared with a tray of cocktails, bright, fizzy concoctions garnished with fruit. Marina selected 2 glasses, handing one to Heather with a gracious nod. "Do try this. It's my own recipe, a little something to celebrate the day." Heather accepted eagerly, taking a generous sip. The conversation flowed on, light and inconsequential, as the band struck up another tune. It happened so suddenly that at first no one realized the gravity of it. Heather paused mid-sentence, her hand clutching at her throat. Her face turned a ghastly shade, contorted in pain, and she staggered, the glass slipping from her fingers to shatter on the grass. I feel," she gasped before collapsing in a heap. Chaos ensued. Jason Rudd knelt beside her, calling for a doctor, while Marina stood rooted to the spot, her hand pressed to her mouth. The village physician, Dr. Haydock, pushed through the crowd, his face grim as he examined the stricken woman. Minutes ticked by, tense and silent, until he straightened up, shaking his head. "She's gone," he announced quietly. "Dead." Whispers rippled through the assembly like wind through leaves. "Poison," someone murmured. The symptoms were unmistakable. The blue tinge to the lips, the convulsions. Cyanide, perhaps, swift and merciless. And the cocktail, hadn't it been meant for Marina? The actress had picked it up first, after all. Eyes turned to her, speculative and uneasy. Miss Marple remained in her chair, her knitting forgotten. She had seen the exchange, noted the details, the tray, the glasses, the brief hesitation in Marina's manner. Something did not quite fit, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. Human nature, she reflected, was full of surprises, and this afternoon had unveiled one that promised to be particularly intriguing. As the police were summoned and the fête disbanded in hushed dismay, Miss Marple's mind began to turn over the possibilities, quiet and methodical as ever. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Motive. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time the last of the fête-goers drifted away from Gossington Hall, leaving behind a scene of disarray, overturned chairs, trampled grass, and a lingering sense of unease that clung to the air like damp mist. St. Mary Mead, for all its pastoral charm, was no stranger to the occasional scandal. But murder, especially one so brazen as poisoning at a public event, was a shock that set tongues wagging in every cottage and pub. Miss Jane Marple, now settled back in her own sitting room, sat by the fire with a shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The events of the afternoon played over in her mind, each moment sharp and distinct, like the frames of one of Marina Gregg's films. Her cottage, a neat little haven of chintz curtains and polished furniture, was quiet save for the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Outside, the village was settling into its evening routine, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from restful. She had seen too much in her long life to take the surface of things at face value. The death of Heather Badcock, so sudden and violent, was no random act, she was certain. The question was not only who had slipped cyanide into that cocktail, but why. And more pressingly, for whom it had been intended. The obvious answer, whispered by the crowd as they dispersed, was that the poison was meant for Marina Gregg. After all, the actress had handed the glass to Heather herself, and who would want to harm an unassuming village woman like Heather? Yet Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing what others overlooked, felt a nagging doubt. Human nature, she knew, was rarely so straightforward. The knock at her door was brisk, announcing the arrival of Inspector Dermot Craddock from Scotland Yard. He was a young man by Miss Marple's standards, though likely in his 40s, with a lean face and sharp eyes that missed little, though he lacked the patience for the subtler currents of village life. He had been dispatched from London to handle the case, a nod to the prominence of Marina Gregg and the potential for a media storm. Miss Marple had met him before, during another grim affair in St. Mary Mead, and she appreciated his professionalism, even if he sometimes found her methods quaint. "Good evening, Miss Marple," Craddock said, stepping into the room and removing his hat. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Inspector," she replied, gesturing to a chair. "I was expecting you. Tea?" He declined with a polite shake of his head, settling into the armchair opposite her. "I've just come from Gossington Hall. The place is a circus, reporters already sniffing about, though we've kept them at bay for now. I thought you might have some observations about today." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "You're very kind to humor an old woman, Inspector. I'm sure you have your own ideas." Craddock smiled, a touch wryly. "I do, but I've learned not to dismiss yours. You were there when it happened. What did you see?" She leaned back, her frail hands folding neatly in her lap. "I saw a great many things, as one does at a fête, but the moment that struck me most was just before poor Heather collapsed. She was talking to Miss Gregg, quite animatedly, about a meeting they'd had years ago. Miss Gregg's reaction was, peculiar. For an instant, she seemed almost startled, as if Heather's words had touched a nerve. Then she recovered, handed over the cocktail, and the tragedy followed. Craddock frowned, jotting a note in his pocketbook. Peculiar how? It's hard to describe precisely, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but deliberate. A flicker in her eyes, a tightening of her smile, like someone who's heard a name they'd rather forget. Of course, it could mean nothing. She's an actress, after all, trained to mask her feelings. But I found it curious. The inspector nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The cocktail was laced with cyanide, no question about it. The lab confirmed a lethal dose, mixed in with the drink's strong flavors, gin, fruit juice, a bit of bitters. Easy to disguise the taste. We've questioned the catering staff, and they're clean. The tray was prepared in the kitchen, but it sat unattended on the terrace for a few minutes before Miss Gregg picked it up. Plenty of opportunity for someone to tamper with it. "And you think the poison was meant for Miss Gregg?" Miss Marple asked, her tone neutral. "It's the logical assumption," Craddock replied. "She's a celebrity, bound to have enemies, disgruntled fans, rivals, perhaps someone from her past. Heather Badcock, on the other hand, well, she seems to have been nobody. A pleasant woman, well-liked in the village, no apparent reason anyone would want her dead. The glass was handed to her by Miss Gregg, who took it from the tray herself. If the poison was in the drink, it seems likely Marina was the target." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet, Inspector, it was Heather who drank it and died. Assumptions are dangerous things, don't you think?" Craddock raised an eyebrow, sensing the gentle challenge in her words. "You have another theory?" "Not a theory, not yet," she said, her voice almost apologetic. "But I do wonder about that conversation. Heather mentioned meeting Miss Gregg years ago at some sort of charity event. She was quite proud of it, as if it were a cherished memory. I couldn't help but think it meant something to Miss Gregg, too, though perhaps not in the same way." Craddock leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "You think this old meeting is connected to the murder?" "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that people's actions are often rooted in the past. A grudge, a slight, a tragedy. They can fester for years, hidden behind a smile. Miss Gregg is a woman of strong emotions, as her films attest. If something in Heather's words stirred a painful memory, it might be worth exploring." The inspector made another note, though his expression remained skeptical. "I'll look into it. For now, we're focusing on Miss Gregg's circle. Her husband, Jason Rudd, is protective, almost to a fault. He insists no one would dare target Marina, but he's cagey about her recent moods. Says she's been under strain with the move to St. Mary Mead and plans to turn part of the hall into a film studio. Then there's the staff. Ella Zielinski, her secretary, seems sharp as a tack, and the butler, Giuseppe, is loyal but evasive. We're also checking for any threats or unusual visitors. Marina mentioned some anonymous letters, vague and unsettling, but she claims they're nothing new for someone in her position." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Anonymous letters, how very convenient. And what did they say?" "Nothing specific, according to her," Craddock said. "Hints of betrayal, someone watching her. She passed them off as the work of a crank, but Jason seemed more concerned. We've got them for analysis, though I doubt they'll yield much. Standard paper, typed, no fingerprints yet." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the possibilities. Anonymous letters could be a genuine threat, a distraction, or even a ploy by the guilty party to muddy the waters. She thought of Marina's poised demeanor at the fête, the way her hand had lingered on the cocktail tray, the fleeting shadow in her eyes. Actors, she knew, were skilled at deception, but no mask was perfect. "Tell me, Inspector," she said, "what do you know of Miss Gregg's life before she came here? Her personal history?" Craddock hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "Not much beyond what's public. She's had a stellar career, films in Hollywood, London, Paris, married several times, though Jason Rudd seems to have stuck. There was a child, born years ago, but he's disabled, lives in a private facility. She doesn't talk about it, and the press knows better than to pry." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her gaze remained sharp. "A child's suffering can weigh heavily on a mother. It might color her actions, don't you think?" Craddock looked at her, a spark of understanding dawning. "You're suggesting a motive tied to her son. That's a stretch, Miss Marple. Heather Badcock was a village secretary, not someone moving in Marina's circles." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "But circles overlap in unexpected ways. Heather was proud of meeting Marina all those years ago. It was a moment that mattered to her. I wonder if it mattered to Marina, too, and why?" The inspector stood, tucking his notebook away. "I'll have my team dig into Heather's background, see if there's any connection beyond this chance meeting. And I'll look into that charity event. 1949, you said? Might be worth checking the dates. In the meantime, if you hear anything in the village—" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "The village is a marvelous place for hearing things, Inspector. People talk, and they rarely realize how much they say." Craddock tipped his hat and left, his footsteps fading into the night. Miss Marple remained by the fire, her thoughts drifting back to the fête. She pictured Heather Badcock, so eager and unguarded, recounting her story with such pride. And Marina, her face momentarily unguarded, as if a long-buried memory had surfaced. Miss Marple had seen that look before, in the eyes of a spinster who'd lost a lover to a rival, in the glance of a shopkeeper cheated by a friend. It was the look of someone whose past had caught up with them, unbidden and unwelcome. She rose, moving slowly to the window to draw the curtains. The village street was dark, save for the glow of a few cottage windows. St. Mary Mead might seem sleepy, but it was a place where secrets simmered beneath the surface, waiting for someone like her to notice. She thought of Marina's films, so often filled with passion, betrayal, and hidden truths. The actress had played many roles, but today, Miss Marple suspected, she was playing one in real life. The question was, what part, and for whom? Her mind turned to Heather's words at the fête, a charity gala years ago when Heather had been under the weather. Miss Marple's memory, though not what it once was still sharp for certain things. She recalled a conversation with her old friend Dr. Haydock years back about the dangers of German measles in pregnancy, a seemingly mild illness, but devastating to an unborn child. If Heather had been ill at that gala and Marina pregnant, the thought was a thread, fragile but insistent, tugging at the edges of her mind. She sat again, picking up her knitting but not working it. Instead, she let her thoughts wander, piecing together the fragments of what she'd seen and heard. The cocktail tray, left unattended for those crucial minutes. The ease with which cyanide could be slipped into a glass, especially in the bustle of a fête. Marina's choice to hand Heather that particular drink, her fingers steady despite that fleeting look of shock, and the anonymous letters, vague yet perfectly timed to cast suspicion elsewhere. Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions, but she also knew that the simplest explanation was not always the truest. The village assumed the poison was for Marina because she was famous, a target for envy or obsession. But what if the truth lay not in fame, but in something far more personal? Heather Badcock, with her guileless enthusiasm, might have unknowingly crossed a line years ago, stirring a wound that had never healed. And Marina Gregg, with her beauty and talent, might be capable of more than acting. The clock struck 9, its chime soft but insistent. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to make a cup of tea. As the kettle hummed, she thought of her old friend Elspeth McGillicuddy, who had once witnessed a murder on a passing train and been dismissed as fanciful. People often underestimated the elderly, mistaking their quiet observation for frailty. But Miss Marple had learned long ago that the smallest details, a glance, a word, a hesitation, could unravel the most carefully woven plans. She sipped her tea, her mind still turning. Tomorrow she would call on Dolly Bantry, who was sure to have heard the latest gossip. Dolly, bless her, had a knack for picking up tidbits without realizing their significance. And perhaps a chat with Mrs. Cherry Baker, Heather's neighbor, might shed light on the woman's life. Heather had been ordinary, yes, but ordinary people could cast long shadows without knowing it. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Miss Marple thought of Marina Gregg, standing on the terrace like a queen in her silver gown, her eyes betraying a secret even her smile couldn't hide. The actress had played many parts, but this, Miss Marple suspected, was her most dangerous role yet. And in St. Mary Mead, where secrets rarely stayed buried, the truth was bound to surface, provided one knew where to look. Chapter 3. The Actress's Mask. The morning after the fête dawned cool and misty, with a thin veil of fog draped over St. Mary Mead like a mourner's shawl. The village was subdued, its usual chatter replaced by hushed conversations in the grocer's shop and the post office, where speculation about Heather Badcock's death swirled like leaves in an autumn wind. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a modest spread of toast and marmalade, found her thoughts returning to Gossington Hall and the enigmatic figure of Marina Gregg. The actress's poise, so carefully maintained during the fête, had cracked for a fleeting moment, and Miss Marple, with her unerring eye for such lapses, could not dismiss it as mere nerves. There was a story behind that look, and she intended to uncover it. She had arranged to visit Gossington Hall that morning, ostensibly to offer condolences to Marina Gregg on behalf of the Women's Institute, of which Miss Marple was a long-standing, if somewhat passive, member. In truth, she wished to observe the actress in her own domain, where the trappings of stardom might be less polished, and the truth, perhaps, more visible. Dressing in her best tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, she selected a hat with a modest brim, suitable for a condolence call but not so fussy as to draw attention. Her walking stick, more a precaution than a necessity, tapped softly as she made her way up the lane to the hall. Gossington Hall stood imposing yet elegant, its Georgian facade softened by climbing roses and the patina of age. The gates, still festooned with bunting from the fête, seemed incongruous now, a reminder of the gaiety so abruptly ended. Miss Marple was admitted by Giuseppe. the butler, a wiry Italian with a deferential manner that bordered on theatrical. His dark eyes flicked over her, assessing before he led her through the grand hall to a drawing room where Marina Gregg awaited. The room was a study in opulence, with tall windows letting in pale morning light that danced on polished mahogany and silk upholstery. Marina sat on a chaise longue, her silver gown replaced by a simple cream dress that nonetheless accentuated her ethereal beauty. Her golden hair was loosely pinned, and her face, though pale, bore the flawless composure of a woman accustomed to being watched. Beside her stood Jason Rudd, his dark suit impeccable, his expression one of guarded concern. A third figure hovered near a writing desk. Ella Zielinski, Marina's personal secretary, a sharp-featured woman in her 30s with a brisk efficiency that suggested she missed little. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," Marina said, rising with a grace that seemed effortless. Her voice was warm, but there was a brittleness to it, like fine china that might shatter under pressure. "This has been such a dreadful shock. Poor Mrs. Badcock. I can scarcely believe it." "I'm sure it's been most distressing," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chair offered by Giuseppe. "The village is quite shaken. Heather was well liked, and to think such a thing could happen at your lovely fête." Marina's smile faltered, and she glanced at Jason, who stepped forward. "It's a tragedy," he said, his voice low and controlled. Marina's beside herself, naturally. She blames herself for handing over that drink, though, of course, she couldn't have known. "Of course," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes resting on Marina. The actress's hands, folded in her lap, were tightly clasped, the knuckles faintly white. "It must be particularly hard for you, Miss Gregg, being so new to St. Mary Mead. One hopes for a peaceful welcome, not this." Marina nodded, her eyes briefly meeting Miss Marple's before drifting to the window. "I thought moving here would be a fresh start. Jason and I wanted a quieter life, a chance to work on our new project, the film studio. But now—" She trailed off, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture both protective and proprietary. "The police are handling it, Miss Marple. Inspector Craddock seems competent. He's been asking about the fête, the catering, anyone who might have had access to the drinks." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern. "Yes, Inspector Craddock is very thorough. I believe he mentioned anonymous letters. How unsettling those must be." Marina's head snapped up, and for a moment her composure slipped, revealing a flash of unease. "Oh, those," she said quickly, recovering with a faint laugh. "They're nothing new. People in my position get them all the time. Jealous fans, cranks. I don't pay them any mind." Jason's jaw tightened, and he shot a glance at Ella Zielinski, who had paused in her task of sorting papers. "They're nonsense," he said firmly. "We've handed them over to the police. They'll sort it out." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Ella, who resumed her work with a studied air of indifference. The secretary's presence was unobtrusive, yet commanding, her dark eyes sharp as they darted between Marina and Jason. Miss Marple made a mental note. Ella Zielinski saw more than she let on, and in a household like this, that could be significant. The conversation turned to lighter matters, the fête's success, the plans for the film studio. But Miss Marple's attention remained on Marina. The actress spoke with practiced charm, recounting anecdotes from her career, but there was a hollowness to her words, as if she were reciting lines from a script. Jason, ever watchful, filled the silences, while Ella moved about the room, her efficiency a quiet counterpoint to the tension. As Miss Marple rose to leave, she paused by a side table where a framed photograph caught her eye. It showed Marina in a film roll, dressed as a grieving mother, her face etched with sorrow so vivid it seemed to leap from the silver frame. "What a striking image," Miss Marple remarked. "You have such a gift for conveying emotion." Marina's smile was tight. "That was one of my early roles, a difficult part, but rewarding." Jason escorted Miss Marple to the door, his manner courteous but brisk. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Marina appreciates the support." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the couple as Giuseppe closed the door behind her. The walk back to her cottage gave her time to reflect. Marina's unease, however well concealed, was palpable, and Jason's protectiveness seemed to border on control. Ella Zielinski, with her watchful gaze, was another piece of the puzzle. A woman who knew the household's secrets but kept her own counsel. And then there were the anonymous letters, dismissed so lightly yet clearly a source of concern. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed as a pretext for thought. She recalled a conversation with Dolly Bantry the previous evening, after Craddock's visit. Dolly, ever eager to share gossip, had mentioned the letters, which Marina had shown her in a moment of confidence. "Vague, nasty things," Dolly had said, typed on cheap paper, hinting that Marina had betrayed someone. No signature, of course. I told her to burn them, but Jason insisted on keeping them for the police. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. Betrayal was a powerful word, one that could mean many things. Professional rivalry, personal infidelity, or something deeper, rooted in the past. She thought of Heather Badcock's gushing account of meeting Marina years ago, the pride in her voice as she described shaking the actress's hand despite being ill. Miss Marple's memory, though sometimes hazy on recent events, was sharp for older ones. She recalled a medical pamphlet she'd read in the waiting room of Dr. Haydock's surgery years ago about the risks of German measles in early pregnancy. The virus, so mild in most cases, could wreak havoc on an unborn child, causing disabilities that lasted a lifetime. The thought was a seed planted firmly in her mind. If Heather had been infectious at that long-ago gala and Marina pregnant, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Marina's son, born with severe developmental issues, was a tragedy the actress rarely discussed, yet it loomed over her life like a shadow. Could Heather's careless handshake have been the cause? And if so, had Marina known all these years later when she handed Heather that fatal cocktail? Miss Marple set her knitting aside and reached for her notebook, a small leather-bound volume where she jotted down stray thoughts. She wrote, 1949, Charity Gala, London. Heather ill, Marina pregnant. Check dates. Anonymous letters. Source, motive, revenge. Her handwriting was neat but spidery, a reflection of her age and her precision. The telephone rang, startling her. It was Dolly Bantry, her voice brimming with excitement. "Jane, you'll never guess what I heard at the vicarage tea. That young gardener at Gossington, Tom Adams, was talking to Mrs. Meavy, the cook. He said he saw Marina lingering by the cocktail tray just before she gave Heather that drink. Looked like she was fussing with the glasses, he said, but he didn't think much of it till now. Isn't that odd?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Very odd indeed, Dolly. Did he say anything else?" Not much, but he seemed nervous, like he wished he hadn't spoken. Mrs. Meavy says he's a good lad, but easily spooked. Oh, and there's talk that Ella Zielinski's been asking questions about the fête, poking her nose into who was where. She's a cool one, that secretary. Miss Marple thanked Dolly and hung up, her mind racing. Tom Adams's observation, however innocent, was a piece of the puzzle. Marina's proximity to the tray suggested opportunity, but the motive remained elusive. Cyanide was not a weapon of impulse. It required planning, access, and intent. Marina, with her film connections, might have obtained it through a studio's chemical stores. Prop departments often used such substances for special effects, or so Miss Marple had read in one of Raymond's magazines. She thought of Ella Zielinski, the secretary with the sharp eyes. In a household like Gossington Hall, a secretary was more than a typist. She was a gatekeeper, privy to secrets both professional and personal. If Ella had noticed anything amiss, say Marina's behavior with the tray, she might be a danger to the guilty party. Or, Miss Marple mused, she might have her own agenda. People in subordinate roles often wielded quiet power, and Ella struck her as a woman who knew how to use it. The afternoon brought a visit from Mrs. Cherry Baker, Heather's neighbor, who arrived with a basket of eggs as a pretext for conversation. Cherry was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s, with a penchant for gossip that rivaled Dolly's. "It's awful about Heather," she said, settling at Miss Marple's kitchen table. "She was such a lively soul, always organizing things. Loved Marina Gregg's films. Used to go on about meeting her back in '49 at some posh do in London. Said she was under the weather but wouldn't miss it for the world. Shook Marina's hand, bold as brass, and got her autograph. Kept it framed in her parlor, you know." Miss Marple poured tea, her expression attentive. That must have been a cherished memory for her. Did she ever mention Marina seeming upset by it? Cherry frowned, stirring sugar into her cup. Not upset, exactly. Heather said Marina was lovely. All smiles, though a bit distracted. Probably because of the crowd, Heather thought. She was so proud of that moment, though, talked about it to anyone who'd listen. Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting this into the pattern. Heather's pride, so innocent on the surface, might have been a spark to a long, simmering flame. If Marina had connected Heather to the tragedy of her son's birth, that moment at the fête, when Heather recounted the story with such glee, could have been a catalyst. But to poison a drink in front of dozens of people required nerve or desperation, or both. As Cherry prattled on about village matters, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Marina's films. She had seen one years ago, at the insistence of her nephew Raymond, who fancied himself a connoisseur of cinema. Marina had played a wronged woman seeking vengeance, her performance so raw it had lingered in Miss Marple's memory. Could life be imitating art? The idea was melodramatic, perhaps, but human nature often was. By evening, Miss Marple was alone again, the cottage quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. She opened her notebook and added, "Tom Adams saw Marina by tray. Ella Zielinski, observant, possibly dangerous. Marina's son, key to motive?" The pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to form a picture. Marina Gregg, with her beauty and her pain, was at the heart of it. Whether she was victim or villain, Miss Marple could not yet say. But she knew one thing. The actress's mask was slipping, and behind it lay a truth as sharp and deadly as cyanide. Chapter 4. The Village Puzzle. The days following Heather Badcock's death cast a pall over St. Mary Mead, though the village's surface, calm, held firm, like a pond undisturbed despite the ripples beneath. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her garden with a cup of tea and her ever-present knitting, watched the world go by with her usual quiet vigilance. The roses were in full bloom, their scent mingling with the damp earthiness of late summer, but her thoughts were far from the garden's serenity. The puzzle of Heather's poisoning was taking shape in her mind. Each piece, Marina Gregg's fleeting expression, the unattended cocktail tray, the anonymous letters, fitting into a pattern that was still frustratingly incomplete. To solve it, she needed to understand Heather Badcock, not as the cheerful, bustling figure the village knew, but as a woman whose past might hold the key to her death. Heather, Miss Marple reflected, was the sort of person who seemed to have no enemies. A widow in her mid-30s, she had lived in a neat, semi-detached cottage on the edge of the village, her days filled with Women's Institute meetings, charity drives, and an almost childlike devotion to Marina Gregg's films. Yet it was precisely this ordinariness that intrigued Miss Marple. In her experience, the most unremarkable lives could conceal connections, accidental or otherwise, that sparked extraordinary consequences. Heather's proud recounting of her 1949 meeting with Marina, delivered so guilelessly at the fête, had triggered something in the actress. Miss Marple was certain of it, but to confirm her suspicions, she needed more than intuition. She needed facts. That afternoon, she set out to visit Mrs. Cherry Baker, Heather's neighbor, whose penchant for gossip made her a valuable, if unwitting, source of information. Cherry's cottage, a mirror image of Heather's, was a riot of color, with geraniums spilling from window boxes and a front door painted a cheerful red. Cherry herself was in the midst of baking, her kitchen fragrant with the aroma of fresh scones. "Oh, Miss Marple, do come in," she said, wiping floury hands on her apron. "I was just thinking of you. Terrible business about Heather, isn't it? The whole village is talking." "Indeed it is," Miss Marple replied, settling at the kitchen table with a nod of thanks for the offered tea. "I thought you might know Heather better than most, living so close. She was such a lively soul, wasn't she?" Cherry nodded, her round face creased with sympathy. "Lively's the word. Always organizing something, bazaars, knitting circles, you name it. Loved being in the thick of things. And such a fan of Marina Gregg. Had all her films on those newfangled tapes, watched them over and over. Kept that autograph from '49 framed on her mantel like it was a holy relic." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes attentive behind her spectacles. "She mentioned that meeting at the fête, I believe. A charity gala in London, wasn't it? It seemed very important to her." "Oh, yes," Cherry said, leaning forward eagerly. "She'd tell anyone who'd listen. Said she was feeling rotten that day, fever, aches, the lot, but nothing would keep her from seeing Marina. It was some big do at a theater, all for charity. Heather got herself to London, sick as a dog, and waited hours to meet her. Shook her hand, got that autograph, and came home prouder than a peacock. Kept saying Marina was so kind, even though she looked a bit peaky herself." Miss Marple's knitting needles, resting in her lap, paused. "Peaky, you say? Did Heather ever mention why?" Cherry frowned, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Not really. Just said Marina seemed tired, maybe a bit distracted. Heather thought it was the crowd. Lots of people pushing to get near her. But she was thrilled to bits, said it was the highlight of her life." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over this new detail. Marina, tired and distracted in 1949, might have been in the early stages of pregnancy. A delicate time, especially if exposed to illness. The seed of suspicion planted earlier grew stronger. If Heather had been infectious with German measles and Marina pregnant, the consequences could have been devastating. But had Marina known all those years ago, or only realized it later, perhaps at the fête when Heather's words brought the past crashing back? Did Heather have any particular connections to Marina beyond that meeting? Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. Perhaps through her work with the Women's Institute or her charity efforts. Cherry shook her head. Not that I know of. Heather was always fundraising, mind you, helped raise money for Miss Gregg's film studio project, got the whole village involved. But that was recent, and she never met Marina again till the fête. Least, not that she told me. She was an open book, Heather was. No secrets, no enemies. That's what makes it so queer, her being poisoned like that. Very queer indeed, Miss Marple murmured. And her personal life? She was a widow, I believe. Yes, poor thing, Cherry said, her voice softening. Lost her husband, Arthur, 5 years back. Heart attack, sudden as you like. No children, which was a sadness for her. She threw herself into village life after that, kept herself busy, lived quietly, just her and her cat, Tinker. I'd pop in now and then, make sure she was all right. Never saw her cross with anyone, not even when old Mr. Giles at the post office shortchanged her. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Heather's life, as Cherry described it, was one of cheerful routine, with no apparent motive for murder. Yet the poison had found her, swift and deliberate, in a glass meant, or so it seemed, for Marina Gregg. The discrepancy nagged at Miss Marple like a dropped stitch in her knitting. She thanked Cherry for the tea and made her way home, her stick tapping softly on the pavement as she pondered. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple found a note from Inspector Craddock, slipped through her letterbox. He had called earlier, hoping to discuss the case, and would return that evening. She settled by the fire, her notebook open, and jotted down what she'd learned. Heather, 1949. Gala, ill with fever. Marina distracted, possibly pregnant. No enemies, but fundraising for film studio. Poison meant for Marina? The last question was underlined, a silent challenge to the obvious. Craddock arrived promptly at 7, his face lined with the fatigue of a man juggling too many threads. Miss Marple, he greeted, accepting a chair but declining tea. I've spent the day at Gossington Hall and the Village Hall trying to piece this together. The catering staff are in the clear, no trace of cyanide in their supplies, and they're all accounted for during the fête. The tray was left unattended for about 5 minutes on the terrace, near the tea tent. Anyone could have tampered with it, but it's a needle in a haystack. Miss Marple nodded, her expression attentive. And Miss Gregg? How is she bearing up? Shaken, but holding it together, Craddock said. She's adamant the poison was meant for her. Says she's had threats before. Nothing specific, just the usual bile that comes with fame. Jason Rudd backs her up, says it's not uncommon, but I'm starting to wonder if we're looking at this the wrong way. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. Oh? And why is that, Inspector? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. We found a vial in the rubbish bin at Gossington Hall, empty but with traces of cyanide. It was tucked under some napkins, as if someone meant to hide it but didn't have time to dispose of it properly. No fingerprints, of course, but it's a lead. The vial's the kind used in film studios for chemical effects. Rudd admitted they have a stockpile for their productions, though he swears it's locked away in London. Miss Marple's lips pursed. How very convenient, and accessible, perhaps, to someone with Marina's connections. Craddock raised an eyebrow. You're still thinking she's involved? It's a stretch, Miss Marple. Why would she poison her own drink, knowing it might kill her? And why target Heather Badcock, of all people? Not her own drink, Inspector, Miss Marple said softly, but a drink she handed to Heather. I've been thinking about their meeting in 1949. Heather was ill, possibly with German measles, though she may not have known it at the time. If Marina was pregnant then and exposed to the virus, well, you know the consequences. Her son's condition is no secret, though she guards it fiercely. Suppose Heather's story at the fête brought that memory back, and with it a terrible realization. Craddock's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting Marina poisoned Heather out of revenge after all these years? I'm suggesting, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm, that grief can twist a heart in ways we scarcely understand. Marina is an actress, trained to conceal her emotions. But no one can hide everything, not entirely. That moment at the fête, when Heather spoke of their meeting, it was as if a curtain parted, just for an instant. Craddock made a note, his expression thoughtful. It's a theory, I'll give you that. I've got my team checking the dates of that 1949 gala and Marina's whereabouts. If she was pregnant then and Heather was infectious, it could explain a motive, but it's still circumstantial. We need evidence, something to tie Marina to the cyanide, or to prove she knew which glass was poisoned. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already racing ahead. And the anonymous letters? Any progress there? Nothing concrete, Craddock admitted. Typed on a common machine, no prints, posted locally. They're vague, talk of betrayal, someone watching her. Could be a crank, could be someone closer. We're looking at the household, Ella Zielinski, Giuseppe, even Rudd himself. They all had access to the tray, though none of them strike me as obvious suspects. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Ella Zielinski, the secretary with the sharp eyes. In a household like Gossington Hall, a secretary was privy to more than schedules and correspondence. She saw the undercurrents, the unspoken tensions. If Marina had acted on impulse or calculation, Ella might have noticed something. And if she had, she could be a threat or an ally to the guilty party. The conversation turned to the village's mood, with Craddock noting the mix of shock and curiosity among the residents. They're all talking about Marina, he said. Some think she's the victim, others whisper she's too perfect to be true. What's your take, Miss Marple? You know these people better than I do. She smiled faintly, her needles clicking softly. People are much the same everywhere, Inspector. They wear different faces, but their motives, love, fear, revenge, are universal. Heather was ordinary, yes, but ordinary people can stumble into extraordinary situations. I think her death was no accident, but whether she was the target or a means to an end, I'm not yet sure. Craddock stood, his expression a mix of respect and frustration. You've got a way of making me question everything, Miss Marple. I'll keep you posted on the gala research. If you hear anything in the village, I shall be listening, she assured him, her eyes twinkling. The village is a marvelous place for hearing things, you know. After he left, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She added, 1949 gala, confirmed dates, Marina's pregnancy, cyanide vial, film studio link, Ella Zielinski, observant, possibly key. The puzzle was growing, each piece a clue to a truth that lay just out of reach. She thought of Marina Gregg, her beauty a mask for a wounded heart, and Heather Badcock, whose innocent pride might have been her undoing. In St. Mary Mead, where secrets whispered in every corner, Miss Marple knew the truth was close, if only she could find the right thread to pull. Chapter 5. A Glimpse of the Past. The mist that had cloaked St. Mary Mead for days finally lifted, leaving behind a crisp morning that seemed to sharpen the edges of the village's quiet beauty. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her writing desk with a pot of tea cooling beside her, felt a similar clarity settling over her thoughts. The death of Heather Badcock, so abrupt and public, was a puzzle that refused to resolve itself neatly. Each new detail, Marina Gregg's fleeting look of shock, the cyanide-laced cocktail, the anonymous letters, pointed to a motive rooted not in the present bustle of Gossington Hall, but in a past that had left scars on the actress's heart. To unravel it, Miss Marple knew she needed to peer into that past, to the year 1949, when a chance encounter between Heather and Marina might have set this tragedy in motion. Her nephew, Raymond West, had always been a useful ally in such matters, his literary connections and penchant for research proving invaluable when village gossip alone wasn't enough. Miss Marple penned a brief letter to him, asking for help in tracking down newspaper archives or society columns from 1949, particularly those mentioning Marina Gregg or charity galas in London. "It's a delicate matter," she wrote, her spidery handwriting precise, "but I believe a specific event holds the key to a most distressing affair here." She sealed the letter and entrusted it to the post, knowing Raymond's curiosity would spur him to act quickly. Meanwhile, the village buzzed with its own theories, each more fanciful than the last. At the Blue Boar, the local pub, talk centered on Marina's Hollywood enemies. Perhaps a jealous rival had followed her to St. Mary Mead. Others whispered of Jason Rudd, whose intense devotion to his wife might conceal darker impulses. Miss Marple, sipping tea at the vicarage with Dolly Bantry, listened to these speculations with her usual patience, knowing that truth often lay in the mundane details the gossips overlooked. Dolly, ever eager to share, leaned across the vicarage's worn oak table, her eyes bright with intrigue. "Jane, you'll never believe what Mrs. Meavy told me this morning. She overheard Giuseppe, that butler at Gossington, talking to the milkman about Marina's moods. Said she's been like a ghost since the fête, pacing the house at night, muttering to herself. And Jason's been locking the studio room, the one with all their film equipment. Suspicious, don't you think?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Suspicious, perhaps, but not conclusive. Grief can make people behave strangely, Dolly, and Marina has much to grieve over, I suspect." Dolly raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of her son, aren't you? That poor boy, tucked away in some institution. Everyone knows about it, but no one dares mention it to her face. Do you really think Heather's death is tied to that?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but deliberate, "that the past has a way of catching up with us. Heather's story at the fête, about meeting Marina in 1949, struck a chord. I'm waiting for Raymond to confirm some details, but I believe that meeting may have had consequences neither woman fully understood at the time." Dolly leaned back, her expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. "You always see things I miss, Jane, but poison, it's so dramatic, like something out of one of Marina's films. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Life can be quite dramatic, Dolly, especially when it involves a woman like Marina Gregg, who lives her emotions so vividly. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Craddock, who had telephoned earlier to request a meeting. He entered the vicarage with a brisk nod, his face etched with the strain of a case that was proving more elusive than he'd hoped. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he greeted, settling into a chair. "I've got some developments, but I'd value your thoughts. This case is a tangle." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes attentive. "I'm all ears, Inspector. What have you found?" Craddock opened his notebook, his tone businesslike. "We've traced the cyanide vial from the rubbish bin to a supplier used by film studios, including Rudd's production company. It's a standard type, used for special effects, smoke, that sort of thing. Rudd swears their stock is kept under lock and key in London, but he admitted some equipment was brought to Gossington for the studio project. We're checking if anything went missing, but it's a long shot. The vial was wiped clean, no prints." Miss Marple's knitting needles, resting in her lap, remained still. "And the anonymous letters? Any progress there?" Craddock's jaw tightened. "Still nothing solid. We've traced the typewriter to a model common in offices, including the one at Gossington Hall. Ella Zielinski uses it for correspondence, but so do half a dozen others in the household. The letters were posted in the village, which narrows it down, but not enough. They're vague. You'll pay for what you did, that sort of thing. Marina insists they're just fan nonsense, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Ella Zielinski. The secretary's sharp eyes and quiet efficiency suggested a woman who saw more than she said. If she had access to the typewriter, she could be involved, or she could be a witness to something crucial. "And what of Miss Gregg herself?" Miss Marple asked. "How is she holding up under this scrutiny?" Craddock sighed. "She's a bundle of nerves, though she hides it well. Jason's practically glued to her side, answering for her half the time. She keeps saying the poison was meant for her, but I'm starting to wonder. We've looked into her past, ex-husbands, professional rivals, but nothing stands out as a motive for murder here and now. Heather Badcock, on the other hand, seems to have been exactly what she appeared, a harmless village woman with a passion for films." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Harmless, perhaps, but not without impact. I've been thinking about that charity gala in 1949. Heather mentioned being ill when she met Marina, possibly with German measles. If Marina was pregnant then, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Her son's condition is well known, though she guards the details fiercely. Suppose Heather's story at the fête reminded Marina of that connection." Craddock leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You're still on that track? I've had my team dig into 1949. Marina was filming The Heart's Reckoning in London that year, but she took a sudden leave in the spring, citing personal reasons. We checked the dates. The gala Heather attended was in March, a big event for a children's charity. Marina was there, signing autographs, shaking hands. If she was in early pregnancy and Heather was infectious, it fits. But it's a long way from that to murder." "Not so long," Miss Marple said softly. "When you consider a mother's pain. Grief can fester, Inspector, especially when it's tied to a loss that never heals. Marina's son is a constant reminder of what might have been. If she realized, at the fate, perhaps, that Heather was the source of that tragedy, it could have sparked something desperate. Craddock made a note, his expression skeptical but open. "It's a theory, Miss Marple, but we need more than motive. The cyanide, the tray, the opportunity, it all points to someone with access and intent. Marina had both, but so did others. Jason, Ella, even Giuseppe. And then there's the question of how she'd know which glass to give Heather. It was a crowded terrace, glasses all alike." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "An actress, Inspector, is skilled at improvisation. A small mark on a glass, a moment's distraction, she could have managed it. But I agree, we need evidence. Have you spoken to the young gardener, Tom Adams? Dolly mentioned he saw Marina near the cocktail tray." Craddock nodded. "We have. He's nervous, doesn't want to get involved, but he confirmed seeing Marina linger by the tray before she handed Heather the drink. Said she seemed to be arranging the glasses, though he couldn't swear to anything specific. He's young, easily intimidated. Jason gave him a sharp look when we questioned him, and he clammed up fast." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Intimidation can be revealing, Inspector. It suggests someone has something to hide, or something to protect." The conversation shifted to the village's mood, with Craddock noting the growing unease among the residents. "They're starting to look at Marina differently," he said. "Some still see her as a victim, but others are whispering about her temper, her past. There's talk of a row between her and Jason a few days before the fête. Giuseppe overheard it, though he claims it was just creative differences over the studio project." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Creative differences can mask deeper tensions. A marriage like theirs, under such public scrutiny, must have its strains. And Ella Zielinski, has she been forthcoming?" Craddock's expression darkened. "She's cooperative, but guarded. Knows the household inside out, handles Marina's correspondence, even screens her calls. If anyone saw something odd, it'd be her. But she's loyal to Marina, or maybe to Jason. Hard to tell where her allegiance lies." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging this. Ella's position gave her power, but also vulnerability. If she knew too much, she could be a target, or a player in her own right. The anonymous letters, typed on a machine she used, were another thread to tug. Were they a distraction, a threat, or something else entirely? After Craddock left, Miss Marple returned to her desk, her notebook open. She wrote, 1949 Gala. Marina pregnant, Heather ill, cyanide vial, studio link, no prints. Tom Adams saw Marina at tray. Ella Zielinski, key witness. Letters, typed, local. Motive, grief, revenge. The pieces were mounting, but the picture remained elusive. That evening, a letter arrived from Raymond, his scrawl as impatient as ever. He'd contacted a journalist friend who had access to newspaper archives and confirmed that Marina Gregg had attended a charity gala at the Savoy in March 1949, a glittering affair for a children's hospital. The society columns noted her radiant presence, though one gossip piece hinted she'd seemed under the weather, leaving early. Raymond promised to dig further, but the dates aligned. Marina, likely in early pregnancy, had been exposed to a crowd that included Heather Badcock, who admitted to being ill. Miss Marple set the letter down, her thoughts racing. The connection was there, fragile but undeniable. If Marina had contracted German measles from Heather, the result, her son's disability, would have been a wound that never healed. But to act on it now, after so many years, required a trigger. Heather's words at the fête, so proud and oblivious, must have been like a match to dry tinder. Yet the precision of the act, the cyanide, the The chosen glass spoke of calculation, not impulse. She thought of Marina's films, the roles of women driven by love or vengeance, their emotions raw and unyielding. Marina was no stranger to playing such parts, but was she capable of living them? Miss Marple recalled a village girl, years ago, who had nursed a grudge over a stolen fiancé, her quiet resentment simmering until it erupted in a petty but telling act of sabotage. Marina's pain, far deeper, could have fueled something far darker. The telephone rang, breaking her reverie. It was Dolly Bantry, her voice breathless with news. "Jane, you won't believe this. Mrs. Mead just told me Ella Zielinski's been asking questions around the village about who was near the cocktail tray, what they saw. She's acting like a detective herself, but Mrs. Mead thinks she's scared. Said Ella's been jumpy, looking over her shoulder. Do you think she knows something?" Miss Marple's lips tightened. "I think, Dolly, that Miss Zielinski is in a very delicate position. She sees too much, and in a house like Gossington Hall, that can be dangerous." After hanging up, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The puzzle was growing clearer, but the stakes were rising. Ella's curiosity suggested she suspected something, or someone. If Marina was the killer, Ella's knowledge could make her a target. And if someone else was involved, Jason, perhaps, or even an outsider, the letters and the cyanide pointed to a mind both cunning and ruthless. She thought of Marina on the terrace, her silver gown shimmering in the sunlight, her hand steady as she handed Heather the fatal drink. An actress could play any role, but no performance was flawless. Miss Marple knew the truth was close, hidden in the shadows of a past that refused to stay buried. In St. Mary Mead, where every glance held a story, she would find it, if she could just keep looking. Chapter 6. The Household Unravels. The late summer light in St. Mary Mead had taken on a golden hue, casting long shadows across the village's tidy lanes and gardens. Yet, beneath this tranquil glow, a restless undercurrent stirred, as if the village itself sensed the darkness that had settled over Gossington Hall. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her armchair with a shawl draped over her shoulders, felt the weight of the puzzle more keenly than ever. Heather Badcock's death, so swift and deliberate, was no isolated act. It was a thread in a tapestry woven from past grievances and present tensions. The more Miss Marple learned, the more she suspected that the key lay not only in the events of 1949, but in the intricate dynamics of Marina Gregg's household, where loyalties and secrets intertwined like ivy on the hall's ancient walls. Her morning began with a visit from Dolly Bantry, who arrived with a basket of apples from her orchard and a head full of gossip. "Jane, you simply must hear this," Dolly said, settling at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "Mrs. Mead was at the market yesterday, and she says Giuseppe, that butler at Gossington, is acting queer. He's been whispering to the maids about arguments he's overheard, Marina and Jason rowing behind closed doors. Something about the film studio, but Mrs. Mead thinks it's more personal. And then there's Ella Zielinski, poking about like she's on a mission. The staff are all on edge." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flickered with interest. "Arguments, you say? Did Mrs. Mead hear any details?" "Not much," Dolly admitted, slicing an apple with a flourish. "Giuseppe clammed up when she pressed him, but he hinted it was a few days before the fête. Said Marina was in tears, and Jason was trying to calm her. Sounds like more than a spat over budgets, don't you think?" "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her knitting needles clicking softly. A household under strain is like a cracked vase, one tap, and it shatters. And Miss Zielinski's curiosity is intriguing. A secretary sees everything, Dolly, and sometimes knows too much for her own good. Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Do you think Ella's involved? She's so efficient. Gives me the chills, the way she watches everyone. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Not involved, perhaps, but observant. And observation can be dangerous in a house with secrets. Thank you, Dolly. You've given me much to think about. After Dolly left, Miss Marple turned to her notebook, adding, Giuseppe, overheard argument. Marina and Jason, prefect. Ella Zielinski, curious, possibly at risk. Household tensions. Motive? The picture was growing clearer, but the pieces were still scattered, like a jigsaw puzzle tipped from its box. She decided to visit Gossington Hall again, this time under the guise of returning a borrowed Women's Institute ledger. It was a flimsy excuse, but one that would grant her access to the household and, perhaps, a glimpse of its undercurrents. The walk to Gossington Hall was brisk, the air carrying the first hint of autumn. The hall's grandeur was undimmed, its windows glinting in the sunlight. But there was a stillness about the place, as if it held its breath. Giuseppe answered the door, his manner as polished as ever, though Miss Marple noted a slight tension in his posture, a wariness in his dark eyes. Miss Gregg is in the conservatory, he said, leading her through the grand hall. She's been resting, but I'm sure she'll be pleased to see you. The conservatory was a glass-walled haven, filled with exotic plants and wicker furniture that gave it the air of a tropical retreat. Marina Gregg sat by a small fountain, a script in her lap, though her eyes were distant, fixed on the cascading water. Jason Rudd was absent, but Ella Zielinski stood nearby, sorting through a stack of letters with her usual brisk efficiency. Marina looked up as Miss Marple entered, her face brightening with a smile that seemed more reflex than genuine. Miss Marple, how kind of you to visit again, she said, setting the script aside. I'm afraid I'm not much company today. This dreadful business has left me quite undone. I can only imagine, Miss Marple replied, settling into a wicker chair. The village is still reeling, and I thought it only right to return this ledger. Heather was so diligent with our records, and we'll miss her terribly. Marina's expression softened, though her hands twisted the edge of her shawl. Poor Heather, such a sweet woman, so full of life. I keep thinking, if I hadn't handed her that drink. You mustn't blame yourself, Miss Marple said gently, though her eyes were watchful. These things are often beyond our control, though I understand you've had other worries, those anonymous letters, for instance. Marina's smile faltered, and she glanced at Ella, who paused in her sorting to meet her employer's gaze. Oh, those, Marina said, her voice light but strained. Just silly nonsense. I get them all the time. People with too much time on their hands. Ella cleared her throat, her tone clipped. They're being handled, Miss Marple. The police have them, and we're taking precautions. No need to dwell on it. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of mild concern. Of course. It must be unsettling, though, especially with all the plans for the film studio. Heather was quite involved in the fundraising, wasn't she? Yes, Marina said, her voice softening. She was so enthusiastic, always organizing events to support it. Jason says it's what kept her busy after her husband's death. Such a tragedy, to lose her now. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Ella, who had resumed her work but seemed to be listening intently. The secretary's presence was like a shadow, unobtrusive, yet ever-present. "It's a great loss to the village," Miss Marple said. "Heather had such a knack for bringing people together. I believe she once met you years ago at a charity gala in London. She spoke of it so fondly." Marina's face froze for an instant, her eyes darkening before she recovered with a practiced smile. "Did she? I meet so many people, I'm afraid the details blur, but I'm glad it meant something to her." The response was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in Marina's voice, the way her fingers tightened on the shawl. Ella, too, seemed to notice, her pen pausing mid-sentence. The air in the conservatory felt suddenly charged, as if a storm were gathering behind Marina's composed facade. Before Miss Marple could press further, Giuseppe appeared, announcing a telephone call for Ella. The secretary excused herself, leaving Miss Marple alone with Marina. The actress's demeanor shifted subtly, her shoulders relaxing, though her eyes remained wary. "You must find St. Mary Mead very quiet after London," Miss Marple said, steering the conversation to safer ground. "Though I suppose the film studio will bring some excitement." Marina nodded, her smile more genuine now. "Jason's dream, really. He wants to create something lasting, a place for new talent. It's why we came here, to escape the chaos of Hollywood and build something real. But now, with this tragedy..." Her voice trailed off, and Miss Marple seized the moment. "It must be difficult, balancing such ambitions with personal challenges. I understand you have a son, though he's not often mentioned." Marina's face paled, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Yes. My boy, he's not well. He lives in a special home where he's cared for. It's better that way, for him and for us." The pain in her words was raw, unguarded, and Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy. "It must be a great sorrow," she said softly. "A mother's love is a powerful thing, but so is her grief." Marina's eyes met hers, and for an instant Miss Marple saw not the glamorous actress, but a woman haunted by loss. Then the moment passed, and Marina straightened, her mask back in place. "You're very kind," she said, her voice steady once more. "But life goes on, doesn't it? We learn to carry our burdens." Ella returned, her expression unreadable, and the conversation turned to mundane matters: the weather, the village's upcoming harvest festival. Miss Marple took her leave, her mind buzzing with what she'd seen and heard. Marina's reaction to the mention of her son confirmed the depth of her pain, but it was the flicker of unease at the mention of the 1949 gala that lingered most vividly. Ella's watchfulness, too, was a piece of the puzzle. A woman who saw everything but revealed nothing. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple received a call from Inspector Craddock, his voice taut with urgency. "Miss Marple, I've got news. We've confirmed the dates. Marina was indeed pregnant in March 1949, during the charity gala at the Savoy. She took her leave from filming shortly after, and her son was born that autumn, with severe developmental issues. We also tracked down a medical record for Heather Badcock. Nothing definitive, but she visited a doctor a week after the gala, complaining of a fever and rash. The doctor suspected German measles, though it wasn't confirmed." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "That's significant, Inspector. If Marina contracted the virus from Heather and later realized it..." "It's still a leap to murder," Craddock cautioned. "But it's a motive. We're digging into Marina's access to cyanide. Those studio supplies are a weak point, and we're keeping an eye on the household. Giuseppe's been cagey, and Ella's been asking questions of her own, which is odd for a secretary. Miss Marple nodded, though he couldn't see her. Ella is a woman to watch, Inspector. She's in a position to know too much, and that can be dangerous. And the argument Giuseppe overheard. Any more details? Not yet, Craddock said. He's loyal to the Rudds, but I'm working on him. He did mention Marina's been taking sedatives, prescribed for nerves. Jason keeps a close eye on her medication, which makes me wonder what he's afraid of. Miss Marple's thoughts raced. Sedatives could mask the taste of cyanide, or at least dull a victim's senses. If Marina had planned the poisoning, she might have used her own medication to ensure success. But the precision of the act, the chosen glass, the public setting, suggested a mind both desperate and calculating. And Ella's curiosity, coupled with Giuseppe's whispers, pointed to a household on the brink of unraveling. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her notebook open. She wrote, 1949. Gala, Marina pregnant, Heather likely infectious. Argument, Marina and Jason, personal. Ella, questioning, at risk. Sedatives, linked to cyanide. The puzzle was taking shape, but it was a fragile structure, held together by threads of suspicion. She thought of Marina in the conservatory, her beauty a shield for a wounded heart, and Ella watching like a hawk from the shadows. Giuseppe's loyalty, Jason's protectiveness, the anonymous letters. All were pieces in a game where the stakes were deadly. A knock at the door startled her. It was young Tom Adams, the gardener from Gossington Hall, his face pale and anxious. Miss Marple, he said, twisting his cap in his hands. I didn't know who else to tell. I saw something at the fête, and it's been eating at me. Miss Gregg, she wasn't just by the cocktail tray. She touched one glass, held it up like she was checking it, then put it back. I didn't think much of it then, but now, with what happened to Mrs. Badcock, Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. You're quite sure, Tom? She handled one glass in particular? He nodded, his voice low. Yes, ma'am. I was clearing some cups nearby, and I saw her. She looked careful, like she didn't want anyone to notice. I should have told the police, but Mr. Rudd's been so sharp with me I didn't dare. You've done the right thing, coming to me, Miss Marple said gently. I'll see that Inspector Craddock hears of it discreetly. You mustn't worry. Tom left, his relief palpable, and Miss Marple added to her notebook. Tom Adams. Marina handled specific glass. The evidence was mounting, pointing to Marina with a clarity that both chilled and saddened her. Yet she knew better than to trust appearances alone. The household was a web of loyalties and fears, and somewhere within it lay the truth, provided she could navigate its tangled strands. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple thought of a village woman she'd known years ago, who had poisoned her husband's tea after years of quiet resentment. The act had been planned with care, but a single slip, a neighbor's glance through a window, had undone her. Marina, with her actress's skill, might be more adept, but no one was infallible. In St. Mary Mead, where every whisper carried weight, Miss Marple would keep listening and watching until the truth emerged from the shadows. Chapter 7. The Cracked Mirror. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its picturesque cottages and orderly gardens, seemed to hold its breath in the days following Heather Badcock's death. The initial shock of the poisoning at Gossington Hall's fête had given way to a quieter, more insidious unease, as if the very air carried whispers of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlor with a cup of tea and her knitting lying idle, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon her. The pieces of the puzzle, Marina Gregg's fleeting expression, the cyanide-laced cocktail, the anonymous letters, and now the confirmation of Heather's illness in 1949, were aligning, yet the picture remained tantalizingly incomplete. The household at Gossington Hall, with its undercurrents of tension and secrecy, was a microcosm of human nature at its most complex, and Miss Marple knew that the truth lay within its walls, waiting to be uncovered. The morning brought a crisp breeze, stirring the leaves in her garden and carrying the faint sound of church bells from the village square. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed and a sensible hat, had decided to call on Dolly Bantry at her cottage on the Gossington estate. Dolly, with her unerring knack for picking up snippets of gossip, was a valuable ally, and Miss Marple hoped to glean more about the dynamics of Marina's household. As she walked, her stick tapping lightly on the path, she reflected on the latest revelation from Inspector Craddock. Heather Badcock's medical records from 1949, indicating a likely case of German measles during her encounter with Marina Gregg at the Savoy Gala. The implications were stark. Marina, pregnant at the time, could have contracted the virus, leading to her son's disability. The question was whether Marina had realized this connection years ago, or only at the fête, when Heather's proud recounting of their meeting had shattered the actress's composure like a mirror cracking from side to side. Dolly welcomed her with a tray of scones and a pot of Earl Grey, her face alight with curiosity. "Jane, you're just in time," she said, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "I've heard the most extraordinary thing from Mrs. Meavy, who got it straight from the milkman. It seems Ella Zielinski, that sharp-eyed secretary, has been snooping about the village, asking who was near the cocktail tray at the fête. She's acting like she's solving the crime herself, but Mrs. Meavy says she looks frightened, keeps glancing over her shoulder as if someone's watching her." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her knitting needles pausing in her lap. "Frightened, you say? That's most interesting, Dolly. A secretary in Ella's position sees everything: letters, conversations, moods. If she's asking questions, she may have seen something she wasn't meant to." Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Do you think she knows who did it? Or, oh, Jane, do you suppose she's involved? She's so controlled. Gives me the shivers." "Not involved, I think," Miss Marple said thoughtfully, "but perhaps in danger. Knowledge can be a heavy burden, especially in a household like Gossington Hall. And what of Marina and Jason? Any more talk of their disagreements?" Dolly's eyes widened. "Oh, yes. Mrs. Meavy says Giuseppe told the cook that Marina's been taking pills, sedatives for her nerves. Jason's been keeping them locked up ever since the fête. Sounds like he's worried she might do something rash. And there's talk of another letter arriving yesterday, nastier than the others. Giuseppe saw it on Ella's desk, something about paying for sins. Marina was in a state when she read it." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Sedatives, locked away by Jason, suggested a man protecting his wife, or controlling her. And the anonymous letters, escalating in tone, were a deliberate attempt to unsettle, perhaps to distract. She made a mental note to press Craddock on the letter's contents, and thanked Dolly, promising to return for tea soon. Her next stop was the vicarage, where she hoped to find the vicar's wife, Mrs. Harmon, who often had insights into the village's undercurrents. Mrs. Harmon, a practical woman with a no-nonsense air, was pruning roses in the vicarage garden when Miss Marple arrived. "Miss Marple, what a treat," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Though I suppose you're here about poor Heather. The whole village is in a tizzy." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, settling onto a garden bench. "It's a troubling affair. I understand you knew Heather through the Women's Institute. Did she ever mention anything unusual about her life or her connection to Marina Gregg?" Mrs. Harmon frowned, snipping a wilted bloom. "Not unusual exactly. Heather was open as a book, loved talking about her meeting with Marina in '49, said she was poorly but wouldn't miss it for the world. Got an autograph, framed it, showed it off to everyone. She was so proud of helping with the film studio fundraising, too. Thought it put St. Mary Mead on the map. Never said a bad word about anyone, though. Hard to imagine why anyone would harm her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the now familiar story. Heather's pride, so innocent on the surface, had struck a nerve with Marina. The actress's reaction at the fête, described by Miss Marple to Craddock as a cracked mirror, was a clue to a deeper wound. "And the household at Gossington Hall?" she asked. "Have you heard anything about them?" Mrs. Harmon hesitated, lowering her shears. "Well, there's talk. The vicar heard from Tom Adams, that young gardener, that things aren't right up there. He says Marina's been wandering the grounds at odd hours, looking lost. And Jason's been short with the staff, especially since the police started poking around. Tom's scared he'll lose his job if he says too much." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. Tom Adams's observation of Marina at the cocktail tray, now coupled with her nocturnal wanderings, painted a picture of a woman unraveling. Yet the precision of the poisoning suggested control, not chaos. "Thank you, Mrs. Harmon," she said. "You've been most helpful." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple found a telegram from Raymond, his efficiency as gratifying as ever. He had unearthed a detailed account of the 1949 Savoy Gala from a Society columnist's archive. Marina Gregg, radiant in a sapphire gown, had been the event's star attraction, signing autographs for a throng of admirers. The columnist noted her early departure, attributing it to fatigue, though a later piece hinted at a delicate condition. Raymond added that he'd found a medical journal from the period, confirming the risks of German measles in early pregnancy, deafness, heart defects, developmental delays. The pieces fit. Heather, infectious with the virus, had shaken Marina's hand, unaware of the consequences. Marina's son, born that autumn, bore the tragic results. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a visit from Inspector Craddock, who arrived with a grim expression. "Miss Marple," he said, settling into her armchair, "we've had a development, and it's not a pleasant one. Ella Zielinski was found dead this morning in her room at Gossington Hall, cyanide again in her coffee. Looks like she drank it last night." Miss Marple's knitting needles stilled, her heart sinking. "Oh dear, that's dreadful. Do you suspect it was deliberate?" Craddock nodded, his jaw tight. "No question." The coffee was on her bedside table, laced with enough cyanide to kill her instantly. No one else in the household touched it. We're searching her room now, but it's a blow. She was our best chance for an inside perspective. Miss Marple's mind raced. Ella's death, so soon after her reported curiosity, was no coincidence. "She was asking questions, wasn't she?" she said softly. "About the cocktail tray, the fate. Perhaps she saw something, or someone, incriminating." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. Exactly. We found a note in her desk, half-written, addressed to Jason. It said, "I know what happened at the fête. We need to talk." She never finished it. Either she was interrupted or she changed her mind. But it suggests she had suspicions. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And the anonymous letters? Any connection?" "We're checking," Craddock said. "The latest one arrived yesterday, as Mrs. Bantry mentioned. Typed like the others, with a nastier tone. 'Your sins will find you out.' Posted locally, no prints. Ella handled Marina's mail, so she'd have seen it. If she suspected the letters were linked to the poisoning, she might have started digging." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the household. Ella's death shifted the puzzle, raising the stakes. If Marina was the killer, Ella's knowledge could have made her a target. But if someone else was responsible, Jason, perhaps, or an outsider, the letters and the cyanide pointed to a calculated mind. "What of Marina and Jason?" she asked. "How are they taking this?" Craddock sighed. "Marina's a wreck, though she's trying to hide it. Jason's holding her together, but he's furious with us, says we're hounding them. Giuseppe's shaken, keeps muttering about curses. The staff are falling apart. Too many deaths. Too fast." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "And the sedatives? You mentioned Jason was controlling Marina's supply." "Yes," Craddock said. "We checked the bottle. Nothing unusual, just standard sedatives. But the quantity's lower than it should be, given the prescription date. Either Marina's taking more than prescribed, or someone's tampering with them. We're testing for cyanide traces, just in case." Miss Marple's mind flashed to a village incident years ago, when a chemist's assistant had been caught diluting prescriptions for profit. The parallel was faint, but the idea of tampered medication lingered. Could Marina have used her sedatives to mask the cyanide's taste, or was someone else manipulating the household supplies? "Have you spoken to Giuseppe about the argument he overheard?" she asked. Craddock nodded. "He's reluctant, but he admitted it was heated, said Marina was crying, accusing Jason of not understanding her pain. Jason kept saying, 'We'll get through this.' Giuseppe thought it was about the studio, but I'm not so sure. It was 2 days before the fête, which puts it close to the first letter's arrival." Miss Marple's knitting resumed, the rhythmic click a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. The argument, Ella's death, the letters, all pointed to a household on the brink. Marina's grief over her son, confirmed by the 1949 timeline, was a motive that burned bright, but the second death suggested a wider net. Ella, with her sharp eyes and curious mind, had become a liability. "Inspector," she said, "have you considered that Ella might have been blackmailing someone? A secretary in her position could uncover all sorts of secrets." Craddock's eyes widened. "Blackmail? It's possible. She had access to Marina's finances, correspondence, everything. If she suspected Marina or Jason, she might have tried to profit from it. We're checking her bank records for unusual deposits." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to Marina's films. In one, she'd played a woman driven to murder by betrayal, her performance chilling in its intensity. Could life be mimicking art? Or was Jason, with his fierce protectiveness, hiding his own role? The letters, typed on a machine Ella used, could be a smokescreen created by the killer to deflect suspicion. "You might look into the typewriter's use," she suggested. "Who else had access? And where was it kept?" "In Ella's office," Craddock said. "Anyone in the household could have used it, though she was the primary user. We're dusting it for prints, but I'm not holding my breath." After Craddock left, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her notebook open. She wrote, Ella Zielinski, dead, cyanide, knew something? Argument, Marina and Jason, personal pain, sedatives, tampered, letters, smokescreen, typewriter, key. The puzzle was darkening, each death tightening the web. She thought of Marina, her beauty a mask for a fractured heart, and Ella, whose curiosity had cost her life. Giuseppe's whispers, Jason's control, Tom's nervous testimony, all were threads leading to a truth that was both tragic and terrifying. As the clock struck 9, Miss Marple closed her notebook, her mind still turning. She recalled a village scandal years ago when a quiet spinster had poisoned her sister's tea over a long-forgotten slight. The act had been meticulous, but a neighbor's chance remark had unraveled it. Marina, or whoever was behind these deaths, was cleverer, but no one was flawless. In St. Mary Mead, where every glance held a story, Miss Marple would keep watching, certain that the cracked mirror of Marina's past would soon reflect the truth. Chapter 8. The Web Tightens. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its orderly hedgerows and quaint cottages, wore a deceptive calm in the wake of Ella Zielinski's death. The second poisoning at Gossington Hall had stirred the residents into a quiet frenzy, their whispers weaving a tapestry of fear and fascination. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlor window with a view of the lane, felt the weight of the mounting tragedies. The puzzle of Heather Badcock's murder had grown darker with Ella's death, each event a thread in a web that seemed to tighten around Marina Gregg and her household. Yet, as Miss Marple's knitting needles lay idle in her lap, her mind was anything but still, piecing together the fragments of motive, opportunity, and human frailty that defined this deadly drama. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor. Miss Marple had spent the night reflecting on Ella's death, cyanide in her coffee, a deliberate act that suggested desperation or ruthlessness. Ella, with her sharp eyes and access to the household's secrets, had been a danger to someone. Her half-written note to Jason Rudd, hinting at knowledge of the fate's events, pointed to a discovery that had cost her life. Was she blackmailing the killer, or had she simply seen too much? And Marina, whose grief over her son's disability now seemed the linchpin of the case, remained an enigma. A woman whose beauty masked a heart capable of great love or great vengeance. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Dolly Bantry, her face flushed with the excitement of fresh gossip. "Jane, you won't believe what's happened," she said, settling into an armchair with a cup of tea. Mrs. Meavy was at the post office this morning, and she heard from the grocer that Ella Zielinski had been asking odd questions, not just about the fête, but about Marina's visitors in the weeks before. Apparently, Ella was seen going through old guest lists, as if she was looking for someone specific. And then there's Giuseppe. He's been telling the maids he's thinking of leaving, says the house is cursed. Miss Marple's eyes brightened behind her spectacles. Cursed indeed. Giuseppe's nerves are telling, Dolly. A man like that, loyal but superstitious, might know more than he's let on. And Ella's inquiries, guest lists, you say? That's most suggestive. She was searching for a connection, perhaps to the anonymous letters. Dolly nodded, slicing a scone with gusto. That's what I thought. Mrs. Meavy says Ella was jumpy, kept locking her office door even during the day. And there's talk of another letter arriving at Gossington yesterday, nastier than the others, according to the cook. Something about no escape from justice. The police took it, but the staff are in a state. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The letters, typed on a machine accessible to the household, were a persistent thorn. Were they a genuine threat, a distraction, or the work of the killer? Ella's death suggested she had stumbled onto something dangerous, perhaps a link between the letters and the poisonings. "And Marina?" Miss Marple asked. "How is she bearing this second tragedy?" "Like a ghost, they say," Dolly replied. "Mrs. Meavy saw her in the garden yesterday, pale as death, staring at nothing. Jason's been hovering, but he's not himself either, snapped at the milkman for no reason. The whole house is falling apart." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the details. A household in disarray was fertile ground for truth to surface, but also for danger to escalate. She decided to visit Inspector Craddock that afternoon, hoping his investigation had uncovered new evidence. After Dolly left, she jotted in her notebook: Ella, guest lists, possible blackmail. Giuseppe, nervous, may know more. Letters, escalating, linked to killer. Marina, unraveling, Jason protective. The web was tightening, but its center remained elusive. At the police station, a modest building on the village's edge, Craddock greeted her with a weary smile. "Miss Marple, you're a welcome sight," he said, gesturing to a chair. "This case is a nightmare. 2 deaths, both cyanide, and we're no closer to an arrest. Ella Zielinski's murder has the press circling like vultures, and Marina's threatening to leave for London if we don't sort it out soon." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her expression one of quiet concern. "A second death complicates things, Inspector. Have you learned anything more about Ella's activities before she died?" Craddock opened his notebook, his face grim. "Plenty. We found a ledger in her room, hidden under a floorboard. It's a record of payments, large ones, deposited into her bank account over the past month. None of them traceable to a single source, but they're irregular, not part of her salary. Looks like blackmail, though we can't prove who she was squeezing." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Blackmail is a dangerous game, especially in a household like Gossington Hall. Her note to Jason, "I know what happened at the fête," suggests she suspected someone. Perhaps she saw Marina with the cocktail tray, or noticed something about the letters. Craddock nodded, his jaw tight. "That's our thinking. Ella was meticulous, kept notes on everything. We found a list of names, people who visited Gossington in the weeks before the fête. Nothing stands out, but she'd circled one entry, a delivery from a film supplier, chemicals for the studio. We're checking if it included cyanide, though Rudd insists everything was locked away." Miss Marple's thoughts raced. The cyanide vial linked to the studio was a damning clue, and Ella's interest in it suggested she'd connected it to Heather's death. "And the typewriter?" she asked. "Any progress on the letters?" "We've dusted it," Craddock said. "Ella's prints, naturally, and a few others, Giuseppe, one of the maids. But it's a common machine, used by half the household. The latest letter, the one about justice, was typed on it, posted locally. Whoever's sending them knows the village and the house." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft. "Or wants us to think so. Letters can be a smokescreen, Inspector, to make us look outward when the answer is closer to home. Ella's death suggests she was too close to the truth. Have you spoken to Giuseppe again about the argument he overheard?" Craddock sighed. "He's like a clam, loyal to the Rudds, but he let slip that Marina was accusing Jason of not supporting her, saying he didn't understand what she'd lost. It was emotional, not professional. Jason kept saying, "We'll fix this, darling." Giuseppe thought it was about their son, but he wouldn't say more. Miss Marple's knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady rhythm. Marina's pain, rooted in her son's disability, was a motive that burned bright, but Ella's death suggested a broader scheme. If Marina was the killer, Ella's suspicions, perhaps about the cyanide or the tray, had made her a threat. But if Jason or someone else was involved, the letters and the second poisoning could be a desperate bid to cover their tracks. "What of Marina's sedatives?" she asked. "You mentioned a discrepancy in the quantity." "We're testing them," Craddock said. "The bottle's short by several pills, more than her prescription accounts for. Could be she's taking extra, or someone's tampering. Jason's cagey about it. Says he monitors her dose to keep her stable. But I'm starting to wonder what he's hiding." Miss Marple nodded, her mind drifting to a village incident years ago, when a chemist's wife had diluted her husband's prescriptions to conceal her own addiction. The parallel was faint, but the idea of tampered medication lingered. Could Marina have used her sedatives to mask the cyanide's taste, or was Jason manipulating her supply to control her? Or worse. "And Tom Adams, the gardener?" she asked. "Has he said anything more about Marina at the tray?" Craddock shook his head. "He's scared stiff, won't talk unless we press him, but he sticks to his story. Marina handled one glass, looked deliberate. We're trying to find other witnesses, but the fête was chaos. No one else noticed anything specific." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Chaos is a perfect cloak, Inspector. An actress like Marina would know how to use it. But Ella's death changes things. Whoever killed her acted quickly, which suggests panic or a plan." Craddock leaned back, his expression a mix of frustration and respect. "You're circling Marina, aren't you? I'll admit, the 1949 connection is compelling. We've confirmed Heather's illness was likely German measles, and Marina's pregnancy aligns with the gala. If she realized Heather was the source of her son's condition, it's a motive. But poisoning her own drink, risking her life? It's a stretch." "Not her own drink," Miss Marple said softly, "but one she chose for Heather. A marked glass, perhaps, or a sleight of hand. An actress is skilled at misdirection, and Ella, with her sharp eyes, might have seen it, or suspected it." Craddock made a note, his brow furrowed. "We're rechecking the tray's handling, but it's a long shot. The staff say it was unattended for 5 minutes, tops. Marina was nearby, but so were dozens of others. We're also looking at Jason. His devotion to Marina is intense, almost possessive. If he thought Ella was a threat to her or to their plans." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to Jason Rudd. His protectiveness could be love, or it could be control. In her long experience, men who hovered so closely often had their own secrets. And Giuseppe, with his talk of curses, might know more than he'd admitted. "You might press Giuseppe gently," she suggested. "A man like that, loyal but superstitious, might let something slip if he feels safe." Craddock smiled wryly. "I'll try. You've got a knack for this, Miss Marple. If you hear anything in the village—" "I shall be listening," she assured him, her eyes twinkling. "The village is a marvelous place for hearing things, you know." After Craddock left, Miss Marple returned to her parlor, her notebook open. She wrote, "Ella, blackmail, ledger of payments, knew about cyanide. Giuseppe, argument, possible witness. Jason, protective or controlling. Sedatives, tampered, linked to cyanide. letters, killer's distraction. The web was tightening, each thread pulling her closer to the truth. She thought of Marina, her beauty a mask for a wounded heart, and Ella, whose curiosity had led to her death. Jason's devotion, Giuseppe's nerves, the escalating letters, all pointed to a killer desperate to protect their secret. That evening, a call from Raymond West brought more news. He had tracked down a retired journalist who covered the 1949 gala, who recalled Marina's early departure and a whispered rumor of her pregnancy. It was hushed up, Raymond wrote, but the film world knew she'd had a health scare. No one mentioned German measles, but the timing fits. He promised to send a copy of a gala photograph showing Marina surrounded by fans, including a young woman who might be Heather. Miss Marple set the telegram down, her mind racing. The photograph could confirm Heather's presence, solidifying the link to Marina's tragedy. But Ella's death was the more pressing concern. The secretary's ledger, her note to Jason, her questions about the tray, all suggested she had uncovered something critical. Had she confronted Marina, or Jason, or someone else entirely? And the sedatives, could they have been used to mask the cyanide, or were they a red herring? As the fire crackled, Miss Marple recalled a village scandal years ago, when a quiet widow had poisoned her cousin over a disputed inheritance. The act had been meticulous, but a chance remark from a delivery boy had unraveled it. Marina, or whoever was behind these deaths, was cleverer, but no one was infallible. The letters, the cyanide, the household's tensions, all were cracks in a facade that was beginning to crumble. A knock at the door startled her. It was Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, her face pale. "Miss Marple, I had to come," she said, clutching her shawl. "Tom Adams was at the vicarage, nearly in tears. He says he saw something else at the fête, not just Marina with the tray, but Jason nearby, watching her like a hawk. Tom thinks Jason knew what she was doing, but he's too scared to tell the police." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Thank you, Mrs. Harmon. That's most significant. I'll see that Inspector Craddock hears of it, discreetly." As Mrs. Harmon left, Miss Marple added to her notebook, "Tom Adams, Jason watching Marina at tray." The web was tightening, and the truth was close. So close she could almost see its shape. Marina, with her grief and her skill, remained the center, but Jason's role was growing clearer. In St. Mary Mead, where every whisper carried weight, Miss Marple would keep listening, certain that the cracked mirror of Marina's past would soon reveal its secrets. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its serene facade of thatched roofs and blooming gardens, seemed to hold its breath as the shadow of two deaths hung over Gossington Hall. The murders of Heather Badcock and Ella Zielinski, both by cyanide, had woven a web of suspicion that tightened with each passing day. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlor with the late afternoon sun filtering through lace curtains, felt the puzzle nearing its resolution. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind racing through the threads of evidence. Marina Gregg's haunted expression at the fête, the cyanide vial linked to her film studio, the anonymous letters, and now the chilling confirmation that Heather's 1949 encounter with Marina had likely caused the actress's son's disability. Ella's death, so swift on the heels of her probing questions, suggested a killer desperate to protect their secret. Yet the truth remained just out of reach, like a reflection in a fractured mirror, and Miss Marple knew that to catch it, she would need to set a subtle trap. The morning had brought a fresh piece of news from Dolly Bantry, delivered over a hurried cup of tea. "Jane, you won't believe what Mrs. Meavy heard at the grocer's," Dolly said, her eyes wide with excitement. "The cook at Gossington says Marina's been refusing to eat or drink anything prepared by the staff since Ella's death. She's terrified, thinks someone's out to get her. And Jason's been locking every door in the house, even during the day. It's like they're under siege." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Fear can be revealing, Dolly. If Marina is afraid, it may be because she knows more than she's let on, or because she suspects someone in her own household, and Jason's vigilance suggests he's protecting something or someone." Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Do you think he's protecting Marina or covering for her? Mrs. Meavy says Giuseppe's been muttering about dark deeds and refusing to handle Marina's trays himself. He's scared, Jane, and that's not like him." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the details. Giuseppe's unease, Marina's paranoia, Jason's control, all pointed to a household teetering on the edge. The anonymous letters, with their escalating threats, were a deliberate prod, perhaps meant to push Marina to the breaking point, or to distract from the killer's true intent. Ella's death, with its hint of blackmail, suggested she had uncovered something critical, perhaps about the cyanide or the cocktail tray. Miss Marple decided it was time to nudge the investigation forward, to unsettle the killer into a mistake. She telephoned Inspector Craddock, arranging to meet him at the police station that afternoon. The station, a modest brick building near the village green, was abuzz with activity. As reporters hovered, drawn by the double tragedy at Gossington Hall, Craddock greeted her with a weary nod, his face lined with the strain of a case that refused to yield. "Miss Marple," he said, ushering her into his office, "I'm glad you're here. We're drowning in leads, but none of them are solid. Ella's bank records show 3 large deposits in the past 6 weeks, all cash, no source identified. Blackmail's looking likely, but we can't pin down her target." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her expression one of quiet concern. "Blackmail is a dangerous game, Inspector, especially in a household as volatile as Gossington Hall. Ella's note, I know what happened at the fête, suggests she suspected someone, perhaps Marina or Jason. Her death was no accident, I presume." Craddock shook his head, his jaw tight. "None. The cyanide in her coffee was a lethal dose, same as Heather's. The cup was on her bedside table. No one else touched it. We found traces of sedative in the residue. Not enough to kill, but enough to dull the taste of the cyanide. Looks like the killer knew her habits, knew she'd drink it at night." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Sedative, you say? From Marina's supply?" "We're testing it," Craddock said. "Her prescription bottle's still short, more than her dosage explains. Jason says she's been taking extra for nerves, but he's cagey about it. I'm starting to wonder if he's covering for her, or if he's the one tampering." Miss Marple's knitting needles, resting in her lap, remained still. The sedatives were a crucial clue, linking the 2 deaths. If Marina had used them to mask the cyanide in Heather's drink, she might have done the same for Ella. But Jason's control over the pills suggested another possibility. Was he manipulating Marina's medication or protecting her from suspicion? "What of the anonymous letters?" she asked. "Any new developments?" Craddock opened his notebook, his tone grim. "Another arrived this morning, typed like the others. posted locally. This one said, "The truth will bury you." Marina was hysterical when she saw it, according to Giuseppe. "We're checking the typewriter again, but it's a dead end so far. Too many people had access. Ella's prints are all over it, but so are Giuseppe's and a maid's." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft. "Letters can serve many purposes, Inspector. They can threaten, distract, or even accuse. If the killer is sending them, they may be trying to make Marina seem the victim. But if someone else is involved, the letters could be a way to push her toward collapse." Craddock leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You're still thinking Marina's the key, aren't you? The 1949 connection is solid. Heather's illness, Marina's pregnancy, the timing of her son's birth. It's a motive, no question. But poisoning her own drink, risking her life, and then killing Ella. It's bold, even for an actress." "Not her own drink," Miss Marple said gently, "but one she chose for Heather. Tom Adams saw her handle a specific glass, and Jason was watching her. An actress is skilled at timing, at distraction, and Ella, with her sharp eyes, might have noticed something. A mark on the glass, a moment of sleight of hand. If she tried to use that knowledge, it would explain her death." Craddock made a note, his brow furrowed. "It's possible. We're rechecking the tray's handling, but the fête was a madhouse. No one else saw anything specific, though we're still asking. Giuseppe's been more talkative. He says Marina's been haunted since the fête, muttering about mistakes and forgiveness. Jason shuts her down whenever she starts." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "A haunted woman is a revealing one, Inspector. Marina's grief over her son is a wound that never healed. If she connected Heather to that loss, and Ella to a threat, her actions, however drastic, might seem justified to her. But we need proof. Have you considered setting a trap?" Craddock raised an eyebrow. "A trap? What did you have in mind?" Miss Marple's voice was calm, almost apologetic. "A small deception, nothing elaborate. Suppose you let it slip to Marina, or Jason, that you've found a witness to the cocktail tray's tampering, someone who saw more than Tom Adams perhaps, and is ready to come forward. If the killer feels cornered, they may act, revealing themselves." Craddock leaned back, his expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Risky, but it could work. We'd need to be careful. Marina's fragile, and Jason's protective. If we spook the wrong person, we might lose our chance, but I'll set it up. We'll say we've got a witness, someone from the fête, and see who reacts." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. "A gentle push, Inspector, can move mountains, or in this case, unmask a killer." The plan was set for the following evening, during a village gathering at the church hall to discuss the harvest festival. Marina and Jason had agreed to attend, a gesture to maintain goodwill despite the tragedies. Craddock would casually mention the witness in their presence, ensuring the rumor spread through the household. Miss Marple, invited as a Women's Institute representative, would be there to observe, her quiet presence unnoticed amid the bustle. The church hall was a modest space, its walls adorned with faded hymnals and children's drawings. The gathering was well attended, with villagers eager for distraction and gossip. Marina arrived in a simple black dress, her face pale but composed, her arm linked with Jason's. Giuseppe hovered at the edges, his dark eyes darting nervously, while the maids kept their distance, whispering among themselves. Miss Marple, seated near the refreshment table, watched with her usual unobtrusive vigilance, her knitting bag at her feet. Craddock, mingling with the crowd, made his move during a lull in the conversation. Speaking loudly enough to be overheard, he said to the vicar, "We're making progress on the case, thank goodness. Found a witness who saw someone tampering with the cocktail tray at the fête. Should have a statement soon." The effect was subtle but immediate. Marina's hand tightened on Jason's arm, her face blanching. Jason's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking to Craddock with a flash of alarm. Giuseppe, pouring tea nearby, nearly dropped the pot, his hands trembling. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She had expected a reaction, but the intensity of it was telling. The killer, or someone close to them, was rattled. The evening wore on, with talk of harvest plans and village matters, but Miss Marple's attention remained on the Gossington party. Marina's smile was strained, her eyes darting to the door as if she longed to flee. Jason stayed close, his hand often touching her shoulder, a gesture that seemed both comforting and controlling. Giuseppe, usually so poised, fumbled with his tasks, his face pale. Miss Marple noted it all, her mind cataloging each glance, each hesitation. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Craddock joined her near the door, his voice low. "Did you see that?" Marina looked like she'd seen a ghost, and Jason wasn't much better. "Giuseppe's a wreck. I thought he'd bolt when I mentioned the witness." Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. "They're frightened, Inspector, and fear makes people careless. Keep an eye on them, especially Marina. If she's the killer, she may try to cover her tracks. And Jason, his protectiveness could be loyalty, or it could be guilt." Craddock made a note, his expression determined. "We're watching the house round the clock. If anyone makes a move, we'll know. And we're testing those sedatives. Found a trace of cyanide in the bottle, not enough to kill, but enough to raise questions. Jason's got some explaining to do." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. "Cyanide in the sedatives? That's significant, Inspector. It suggests premeditation, not impulse. Someone planned to use those pills, perhaps to mask the poison's taste." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Witness Bluff, Marina, Jason," Giuseppe rattled. "Sedatives, cyanide traces, planned, letters, killer's distraction, Jason, guilty or protective." The trap was set and the web was tightening. She thought of Marina, her beauty a fragile shell for a heart scarred by loss, and Jason, whose devotion might hide a darker truth. Giuseppe's nerves, the letters, Ella's blackmail, all were threads leading to a killer who was running out of time. As the clock struck 10, a call from Dolly Bantry brought more news. "Jane, Mrs. Meavy just telephoned. She says Marina was seen in the studio room tonight, alone, rummaging through boxes. Giuseppe caught her and looked terrified, but she sent him away. What do you make of that?" Miss Marple's lips tightened. "I make of it, Dolly, that Marina is searching for something, or hiding it. The studio room with its film supplies is where the cyanide came from. She may be feeling the pressure of our trap." After hanging up, Miss Marple sat back, her mind racing. She recalled a village scandal years ago when a quiet farmer had poisoned his brother's ale to settle a land dispute. The act had been meticulous, but a neighbor's chance sighting of him in the shed had undone him. Marina, or whoever was behind these deaths, was cleverer, but the bluff had shaken them. In St. Mary Mead, where every whisper carried weight, Miss Marple knew the truth was close, so close she could almost touch it. The trap was set, and now she would wait, watching for the killer's next move. Chapter 10. The Confession. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its serene cottages and orderly hedgerows, seemed to hum with an unspoken tension as the investigation into the poisonings at Gossington Hall reached a fevered pitch. The trap set by Miss Jane Marple and Inspector Craddock, a whispered rumor of a witness to the cocktail, Trey's tampering, had stirred the household into a state of barely concealed panic. Miss Marple, seated in her parlor with the evening shadows lengthening across the room, felt the puzzle nearing its climax. The deaths of Heather Badcock and Ella Zielinski, both by cyanide, were threads in a web that centered on Marina Gregg, whose grief over her son's disability, linked to a 1949 encounter with Heather, provided a motive as old as human nature itself. Yet the second death and the escalating anonymous letters suggested a killer driven by both calculation and desperation. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched, her mind sharp as she anticipated the next move in this deadly game. The morning had begun with a call from Dolly Bantry, her voice breathless with fresh gossip. "Jane, you'll never believe what Mrs. Meavy heard from the housemaid at Gossington," she said, barely pausing for breath. "Marina's been refusing to leave her room since that church hall meeting. She's locked herself in, won't even let Jason bring her meals. And Giuseppe, he's packed a bag, says he's leaving for London tomorrow. The maids are whispering he's scared of something, or someone, in the house." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. "Scared, is he? That's telling, Dolly. A man like Giuseppe, so loyal, doesn't flee without reason, and Marina's seclusion, fear, perhaps, or guilt. Did Mrs. Meavy mention anything else?" Dolly leaned into the telephone, her tone conspiratorial. "Yes. The housemaid says Jason's been in the studio room every night, going through boxes like a man possessed. She thinks he's looking for something, papers, maybe, or equipment. And there's talk of another letter, slipped under Marina's door last night. The maid didn't see it, but Marina was crying when she found it." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The letters, with their ominous threats, were a relentless pressure, and Jason's nocturnal searches suggested he was either protecting Marina or concealing his own secrets. "Thank you, Dolly," she said. "You've been most helpful. Keep your ears open, won't you?" After hanging up, Miss Marple jotted in her notebook, "Marina, locked in room, fearful or guilty. Giuseppe, fleeing, knows something. Jason, searching studio, hiding evidence. Letter, escalating pressure." The trap had worked, unsettling the household, but the killer's next move was critical. She decided to visit Gossington Hall under the pretext of delivering a condolence card for Ella Zielinski. It was a thin excuse, but one that would allow her to observe Marina and Jason in their moment of crisis. The walk to Gossington Hall was brisk, the air heavy with the scent of late roses. The hall's grandeur was undimmed, but an air of disquiet hung over it, as if the very stones sensed the turmoil within. Giuseppe answered the door, his face pale and his manner distracted. "Miss Gregg is indisposed," he said, his accent thicker than usual. "But I will see if she can receive you." Miss Marple noted his trembling hands as he led her to the drawing room. The space was as opulent as ever, with its silk drapes and polished mahogany, but it felt hollow, like a stage set abandoned after a performance. Jason Rudd appeared first, his dark eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained but courteous. "This is a kind gesture, but Marina's not well. This business with Ella has hit her hard." "I quite understand," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "It's a terrible shock for you all. I only wish to offer my sympathies and to see how Miss Gregg is coping." Jason's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the door. "She's fragile. The police, the letters, the gossip, it's too much. I'm trying to keep things together, but it's not easy." Before Miss Marple could respond, Marina entered, her appearance startling. Gone was the radiant actress. In her place was a woman pale and gaunt, her golden hair loose and unkempt, her eyes red-rimmed. She wore a simple dressing gown, and her hands clutched a handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been so kind. I wondered if I might speak with you. Alone." Jason's face darkened, but he nodded, stepping out with a reluctant glance. Giuseppe hovered, then excused himself, leaving Miss Marple and Marina in the quiet room. The actress sank onto the chaise longue, her hands trembling. "You see things, don't you?" she said, her voice low and urgent. "Things other people miss. I've heard about you in the village. I need to tell someone before it's too late." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained calm. "I'm here to listen, my dear. Whatever you have to say, it's safe with me." Marina's eyes darted to the door as if fearing interruption. Then, in a rush, the words poured out. "It's about Heather and Ella. I can't bear it anymore. That day at the fête, when Heather told me about 1949, about meeting me at the Savoy, it was like a knife. I remembered her, you see. I didn't at first, but when she said she was ill, shaking my hand despite it, I knew. I was pregnant then, just a few weeks. My son, my boy, was born the way he is because of her, because of German measles." Miss Marple nodded, her voice gentle. "That must have been a terrible realization." Marina's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I've carried it all these years, the pain of it. My boy, locked away in a home, never knowing me as his mother. I tried to forget, to move on. But when Heather stood there, so proud, so oblivious, something snapped. I couldn't bear it. The cocktail tray was there, and I had the cyanide. From the studio, for effects. I marked a glass, just a small scratch, and gave it to her. I didn't think, I just acted." Miss Marple's heart sank, though she kept her expression serene. "And Ella? Did she suspect you?" Marina's hands twisted the handkerchief, her voice a whisper. "Ella saw me, not at the tray, but later, when I was hiding the vial. She started asking questions, checking the studio records. I didn't mean to kill her, I swear it. I put a little cyanide in her coffee, just to scare her, to make her stop, but it was too much. I didn't know. I didn't want this." Miss Marple's eyes softened with sympathy, though her mind was sharp. "And the letters? Were they your doing, to make it seem someone else was after you?" Marina nodded, her face crumpling. "I typed them, on Ella's machine. I thought they'd make it look like I was the target, not Heather. I was so careful, but it's all falling apart. Jason doesn't know. He thinks I'm just breaking down. But I can't keep this up. I'm so tired." Miss Marple reached out, touching Marina's hand gently. "You've carried a heavy burden, my dear, but the truth is out now, and that's a start. You must tell Inspector Craddock. He's a fair man, and he'll listen." Marina's eyes widened, a flicker of panic returning. "The police? They'll destroy me, my career, everything. Jason will never forgive me." "He may surprise you," Miss Marple said softly. "Love can forgive much, even this, but you cannot run from the truth. It will find you, one way or another." Marina's shoulders slumped, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Miss Marple rose, promising to send for Craddock discreetly. As she left the drawing room, she found Jason waiting in the hall, his face taut with worry. "Is she all right?" he asked, his voice low. "She's struggling," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. "But she's ready to speak. You might prepare yourself, Mr. Rudd. The truth can be painful, but it's necessary." Jason's eyes searched hers, a mix of fear and resignation in his gaze. "I've tried to protect her," he said. "Whatever she's done, I love her." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy. She stepped into the crisp evening air, her mind racing. Marina's confession had confirmed her suspicions. The grief over her son, ignited by Heather's words, had driven her to a desperate act. Ella's death, though unintended, was a tragic consequence of her fear of exposure. The letters, a clever ruse, had nearly succeeded in casting suspicion elsewhere. Yet questions remained. Had Jason suspected or even abetted her actions? His protectiveness, his searches in the studio, suggested he knew more than he'd admitted. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple telephoned Craddock, relaying Marina's request to speak. "She's confessed, Inspector," she said, her voice steady. "To Heather's murder and Ella's. But you must handle her gently. She's on the edge." Craddock arrived at Gossington Hall within the hour, taking Marina's statement in the presence of her solicitor, summoned urgently from London. Miss Marple, invited to attend as a witness, sat quietly in the drawing room as Marina repeated her story, her voice hollow but resolute. Jason stood by her, his face a mask of anguish, but he did not interrupt. Giuseppe, summoned to provide tea, lingered at the door, his eyes wide with shock. Craddock's questions were measured, his tone professional, but not unkind. "You obtained the cyanide from the studio supplies?" he asked. Marina nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "Yes, we had some for special effects, smoke, that sort of thing. I took a vial months ago when we moved here. I didn't plan to use it, not at first, but when Heather spoke at the fête, it was like a fire in my mind." "And Ella?" Craddock pressed. "You meant to scare her?" "I panicked," Marina whispered. "She was asking about the studio, the chemicals. I thought she'd tell Jason or the police. I put a small amount in her coffee just to make her ill. I didn't know it would kill her." Craddock made notes, his expression grim. "And the letters? You typed them to make it seem you were the target?" "Yes," Marina said, her voice breaking. "I used Ella's typewriter, posted them in the village. I thought it would keep everyone looking elsewhere. I was so wrong." Miss Marple watched silently, her heart heavy. Marina's confession was a tragic unraveling, a testament to the destructive power of grief. Yet she noted Jason's silence, his hand resting on Marina's shoulder. Had he known or suspected her actions? His searches in the studio, his control over her sedatives, suggested a man trying to contain a crisis or conceal his own complicity. As Craddock concluded the interview, promising to return with formal charges, Miss Marple took her leave, her mind still turning. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Marina confessed to Heather and Ella's deaths, letters her doing. Jason, knew or suspected. Sedatives used to mask cyanide. Giuseppe, shock but silent. The puzzle was nearly complete, but Jason's role remained unclear. Had he been protecting Marina out of love or covering his own tracks?" A late call from Dolly Bantry brought one final piece of news. "Jane, Mrs. Meavy says Giuseppe's gone. Left for London this morning. Didn't even say goodbye. The maids are in a state, think he was terrified of Marina. Do you think he knew? Miss Marple's lips tightened. I think, Dolly, that Giuseppe saw more than he could bear. But the truth is out now, and that's what matters. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple closed her notebook, her thoughts drifting to a village tragedy years ago when a quiet seamstress had poisoned her rival over a long-forgotten slight. The act had been careful, but a neighbor's chance remark had undone her. Marina's plan, driven by a mother's pain, had been cleverer, but the trap had worked, drawing her confession like a moth to a flame. In St. Mary Mead, where secrets whispered in every corner, Miss Marple knew the truth always surfaced, provided one knew how to listen. Chapter 11. The Final Piece. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its tranquil lanes and blooming gardens, seemed to exhale a cautious sigh as the truth behind the poisonings at Gossington Hall came to light. Marina Gregg's confession, delivered in a hushed drawing room to Miss Jane Marple and Inspector Craddock, had unraveled the mystery of Heather Badcock's death and Ella Zielinski's tragic end, revealing a tale of grief twisted into vengeance. Yet, as Miss Marple sat by her parlor fire, the glow casting soft shadows on the chintz curtains, she felt a lingering unease. The puzzle was nearly complete, but a final piece remained. Jason Rudd's role in the affair. His fierce protectiveness, his late-night searches in the studio, and his silence during Marina's confession hinted at a truth yet to be fully uncovered. The web had tightened, and now Miss Marple knew the last thread must be pulled to reveal the full picture. The morning dawned cool and clear, the sky a pale blue that promised autumn's approach. Miss Marple, dressed in her familiar tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, reviewed her notebook, its pages filled with spidery notes. Marina confessed to Heather and Ella's deaths, letters her ruse. Jason, protective, studio searches, silent. Giuseppe, fled, scared. Sedatives, cyanide traces. Marina's admission had confirmed the motive, her son's disability, linked to Heather's infectious handshake in 1949. But Jason's behavior suggested he was more than a devoted husband. Had he known of Marina's plan, or even abetted it? Miss Marple's experience told her that love could blind, but it could also conceal, and Jason's actions bore scrutiny. A knock at the door announced Dolly Bantry, her face alight with the latest village talk. "Jane, it's chaos at Gossington," she said, settling into an armchair with a cup of tea. "Mrs. Meavy says the maids are packing up, terrified to stay after Marina's arrest. Jason's holed up in the studio, barely speaking to anyone, and the police found something in the studio room, a locked box hidden behind some props. Mrs. Meavy heard Craddock talking about it, says it's got the whole house in a panic." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "A locked box, you say? Did Mrs. Meavy hear what was in it?" Dolly shook her head, slicing a scone with gusto. "Not yet, but Craddock's team is prying it open today. The maids think it's got something to do with the cyanide, maybe more vials or papers. And there's talk Jason's been burning documents in the garden at night. Sounds like he's covering something, don't you think?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Covering, or protecting. Jason's devotion to Marina is clear, but devotion can take many forms. "Thank you, Dolly. You've given me much to ponder." After Dolly left, Miss Marple telephoned Craddock, arranging to meet him at the police station. The station was quieter now, the press having retreated as Marina's confession dominated the headlines. Craddock greeted her with a tired smile, his desk cluttered with reports. "Miss Marple, Your trap worked like a charm, he said, gesturing to a chair. Marina's statement is solid. She's admitted to everything, though her solicitor's pushing for a plea of diminished responsibility. But I've got a feeling you're not here to gloat. Miss Marple settled into the chair, her expression one of quiet concern. Not at all, Inspector. Marina's confession explains much, but I can't help wondering about Jason Rudd. His silence during her statement, his searches in the studio. Do you think he knew what she'd done? Craddock leaned back, his brow furrowed. I've been asking myself the same thing. We found that box Dolly mentioned, locked, hidden in the studio behind some old film canisters. It had a vial, empty but with cyanide residue, and a notebook with Marina's handwriting. It's a log of sorts, detailing her plan for the fête. Times, tray placement, even a sketch of a glass with a scratched rim. Damning evidence, but Jason's prints are on the box, not Marina's. Miss Marple's knitting needles, resting in her lap, stilled. Jason's prints? That's significant, Inspector. If he handled the box, he either found it and hid it, or he was part of her plan. Craddock nodded, his jaw tight. That's what we're thinking. We questioned him this morning, and he's sticking to his story. Says he found the box after Ella's death, suspected Marina, and hid it to protect her. Claims he didn't know about Heather's murder until Marina confessed. But he's nervous, keeps contradicting himself about when he found it. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft. A man protecting his wife might hide evidence, but he'd also want to know the truth. Did he say anything about the sedatives or the anonymous letters? Craddock opened his notebook, his tone grim. He admits to locking up Marina's sedatives, says he was worried she'd take too many. We found cyanide traces in the bottle, as you know. Small amounts, likely used to mask the poison's taste in both murders. Jason claims he didn't notice the shortage until we pointed it out. As for the letters, he swears they were all Marina's doing, though he only learned that after Ella's death. Says she confessed to him about the typewriter, begged him to keep quiet. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. And yet he was in the studio, searching. If he suspected Marina, why not go to you at once? His actions suggest he knew more, perhaps even before Ella's death. Craddock leaned forward, his interest piqued. You think he was complicit, not just covering up, but helping her? Not helping, perhaps, Miss Marple said gently, but knowing. Love can make us blind, Inspector, but it can also make us complicit. Jason's devotion to Marina is intense, almost possessive. If he saw her with the tray or found the vial early on, he might have chosen to protect her, even at the cost of Ella's life. Craddock made a note, his expression thoughtful. It's possible. We're bringing him in for a formal interview this afternoon. His prints on the box, the sedative tampering. It's enough to hold him as an accessory, at least. But we need more than suspicion. Giuseppe's disappearance doesn't help. He might have seen something, but he's vanished to London, and we're still tracking him. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Giuseppe's flight suggested fear, perhaps of Marina or Jason, or both. His whispers of dark deeds and his reluctance to handle trays hinted at knowledge he couldn't bear to share. You might check Giuseppe's contacts in London, she suggested. A man like that, loyal but superstitious, may have confided in someone, a friend, a priest, and the studio room. Have you searched it thoroughly? We're still at it, Craddock said. Found some old scripts, props, but nothing else incriminating. The cyanide vial's the key. It matches the one from the fête, and the suppliers confirmed it came from their London stock. Jason's story about finding it after Ella's death is shaky, but we can't prove he knew earlier. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Proof is elusive, Inspector, but human nature is not. Jason's behavior, his searches, his silence, suggests a man torn between love and guilt. If he suspected Marina's plan, he may have let it unfold, hoping to shield her from the consequences. Craddock leaned back, his eyes narrowing. You're painting a grim picture, Miss Marple. A husband who knows his wife's a killer and does nothing. That's cold. Not cold, Miss Marple said softly, but human. Love can twist us in ways we scarcely understand. I recall a village woman, years ago, who knew her husband was cheating their neighbors, but stayed silent out of loyalty. It destroyed her in the end, but she couldn't betray him. Jason may be in a similar bind. The conversation turned to Marina's arrest, which had been handled discreetly to avoid a media storm. She was in custody in London, her solicitor preparing a defense based on emotional distress. Craddock admitted the case was strong, the vial, the notebook, her confession, but Jason's role remained a question mark. We're watching him, he said. If he's hiding anything else, we'll find it. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the studio room. The locked box with Jason's prints was a damning clue, but its contents, the notebook, the vial, pointed to Marina's planning. Had Jason found it early and chosen to hide it, or had he known of her intentions all along? She recalled Tom Adams's testimony, Jason watching Marina at the cocktail tray, his eyes sharp and alert. It suggested awareness, if not complicity. That evening, Miss Marple received a call from Raymond West, his voice crackling with excitement. Aunt Jane, I've got that photograph from the 1949 gala. It's grainy, but it shows Marina surrounded by fans, and there's a young woman in the foreground holding an autograph book. Matches Heather's description, floral dress, short hair. I'm sending it to Craddock, but it confirms she was there, right next to Marina. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind cataloging this final confirmation. The photograph solidified the link, Heather's infectious handshake, Marina's pregnancy, the tragedy of her son. But it was Jason's role that nagged at her. His protectiveness, his searches, his silence during the confession, all pointed to a man who knew more than he'd admitted. The next morning, Craddock arrived at her cottage, his face grim but determined. We've got Jason, he said, settling into an armchair. He broke down during the interview, admitted he found the box before Ella's death, says he suspected Marina after Heather's murder, saw her acting strangely with the vial in the studio. He hid it to protect her, thought he could talk her out of anything drastic. But he swears he didn't know about Ella until it was too late. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind remained sharp. And do you believe him, Inspector? Craddock sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to, but his story's got holes. He knew about the cyanide, hid the evidence, and didn't tell us even after Ella died. That's obstruction at best, accessory at worst. We're charging him with concealing evidence, maybe more if we can prove he knew about Heather's murder beforehand. Miss Marple nodded. Her knitting resumed, the click of her needles a steady rhythm. Jason's love for Marina is his strength and his weakness. He may not have poisoned anyone, but his silence enabled her. And the letters, Marina's work, but did he know? He claims he didn't, Craddock said. Says she confessed to the letters after Ella's death, begged him to keep it quiet. But his prints on the box, his late-night searches, It's enough to make me wonder. We're searching the studio again, looking for anything he might have missed. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a devoted son had covered for his mother's theft, knowing it would ruin her. His silence had cost him dearly, but love had blinded him. Jason's actions echoed that pattern, his loyalty to Marina a shield that had become a trap. "You might look for any correspondence in the studio," she suggested. "Jason may have written something, a note, a diary, revealing what he knew and when." Craddock made a note, his expression a mix of respect and frustration. "You've got a nose for this, Miss Marple. We'll check. And we've tracked Giuseppe. He's in London, staying with a cousin. Says he left because he was scared of Marina, thought she'd poison him next. He's agreed to give a statement, might shed light on what he saw." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Giuseppe's fear is telling, Inspector. A man like that doesn't flee without cause. He may have seen Marina with the vial, or overheard something between her and Jason. His statement could be the final piece." As Craddock left, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her notebook open. She wrote, "Jason, hid box, knew before Ella. Giuseppe, statement, saw Marina. Letters, Marina's ruse, Jason complicit. Studio, more evidence?" The puzzle was complete, save for Jason's full truth. She thought of Marina, her beauty shattered by grief, and Jason, whose love had led him to shield a killer. The anonymous letters, a desperate ploy to deflect suspicion, had nearly succeeded, but the trap had drawn Marina's confession, and now Jason's role was emerging. A late call from Dolly Bantry brought one final tidbit. "Jane, Mrs. Meavy says the police found a letter in the studio, tucked in a script. It's from Jason to Marina, written before the fête. Didn't say much, but he begged her to let go of the past." Sounds like he knew she was planning something, doesn't it? Miss Marple's heart quickened. "It does, Dolly. Thank you. The truth is nearly out." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple closed her notebook, her thoughts settling. She recalled a village tragedy years ago, when a loyal wife had hidden her husband's crimes, only to be undone by a neighbor's chance remark. Jason's silence, born of love, had enabled Marina's vengeance, but the truth had surfaced, as it always did in St. Mary Mead. The final piece, Jason's complicity, was now in place, and the mirror, cracked from side to side, had revealed its secrets at last. Chapter 12. The Village Settles. The quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, lined with their orderly hedgerows and blooming late summer roses, seemed to breathe a cautious sigh of relief as the turmoil at Gossington Hall reached its somber conclusion. The arrests of Marina Gregg and Jason Rudd, following Marina's confession to the murders of Heather Badcock and Ella Zielinski, had sent ripples through the village, but the surface calm was swiftly restored, as if the community were eager to smooth over the cracks in its tranquil facade. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her garden with a shawl draped over her shoulders, tended her roses with a gentle hand, her thoughts lingering on the tragic drama that had unfolded. The puzzle was complete. Its pieces, Marina's grief, Jason's complicity, the anonymous letters, and the deadly cyanide, fitted together to reveal a tale of love, loss, and vengeance. Yet, as her pruning shears snipped a wilted bloom, Miss Marple felt a quiet melancholy, for the truth, though necessary, had come at a heavy cost. The morning was soft and golden, the air carrying the faint chill of approaching autumn. Miss Marple's cottage, with its chintz curtains and polished furniture, was a haven of order amid the village's whispered aftermath. The arrests had been handled with discretion, the police escorting Marina and Jason to London under cover of night to avoid the press's prying eyes. Marina's solicitor was preparing a defense, citing her emotional fragility, while Jason faced charges of concealing evidence, his role as an accessory still under scrutiny. The village, though abuzz with talk, was already turning its attention to the harvest festival, as if eager to bury the scandal beneath routine. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a visit from Dolly Bantry, who arrived with a basket of apples and a head full of gossip. "Jane, it's all anyone can talk about," Dolly said, settling into a garden chair with a cup of tea. "Mrs. Meavy says the maids at Gossington are leaving in droves, and the house is up for sale already. Can you imagine Marina and Jason gone just like that? The village feels empty without them, even if they did bring trouble." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly behind her spectacles. "Trouble has a way of finding its way to St. Mary Mead, Dolly, but the village endures, as it always does. What else have you heard?" Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, Mrs. Meavy got it from the postman that Giuseppe's back in London, working for some fancy hotel. He's telling everyone he left because he knew Marina was dangerous. Says he saw her in the studio with that vial weeks before the fête, but was too scared to speak up. And there's talk Jason wrote a letter to his solicitor, admitting he suspected Marina's plan, but couldn't bear to turn her in. Love, I suppose, makes fools of us all." Miss Marple nodded, her pruning shears pausing. Giuseppe's return confirmed her suspicions. He had fled out of fear, his whispers of dark deeds a clue to his knowledge of Marina's actions. Jason's letter, if true, was the final piece, revealing a man torn between loyalty and morality. "Love can be a powerful force, Dolly," she said softly, "but it can also blind us to the truth. Jason's silence enabled Marina, though I believe he meant only to protect her." Dolly sliced an apple, her brow furrowed. "It's so tragic, Jane. Marina, with all her beauty and talent, driven to murder over something that happened years ago. And poor Heather, she never knew what she'd done, did she?" "No," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "Heather was a kind soul, proud of her moment with Marina, unaware of the pain it caused. And Ella, her curiosity was her undoing. It's a sad tale, but one we've seen before, in different guises." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the gate. Inspector Craddock, looking weary but relieved, stepped into the garden, his hat in hand. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he greeted, accepting a chair. "I thought you'd want to know how it's all wrapping up. Marina's in custody, and her solicitors pushing for a psychiatric evaluation. Jason's been charged as an accessory. His letter to his solicitor confirms he knew about the cyanide before Ella's death, though he claims he didn't believe Marina would go through with it." Miss Marple's knitting, resting in her lap, remained untouched. "And do you believe him, Inspector?" Craddock sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think he's telling the truth, as far as it goes. The letter's damning. He wrote it the night before the fête, begging Marina to let the past go. Says he found the vial in her dressing table, suspected her plan, but thought he could talk her out of it. When Heather died, he panicked, hid the box in the studio, hoping to shield her. He didn't know about Ella until it was too late." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes softening. "A man in love can convince himself of many things, Inspector. Jason's devotion to Marina was his strength and his downfall. And Giuseppe, what did his statement reveal?" Craddock opened his notebook, his tone grim. He's been a gold mine, once we tracked him down. Says he saw Marina in the studio a month before the fête, handling a vial from the film supplies. He didn't think much of it then, assumed it was for a project. But after Heather's death, he overheard Marina muttering about making things right. He was terrified she'd poison him next, so he bolted. His statement corroborates Marina's confession and Jason's complicity. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Poor Giuseppe. Loyalty and fear are a heavy burden, and the anonymous letters, Marina's work, as she said. Confirmed, Craddock said. We found the typewriter ribbon in her dressing room, with traces of the same ink used in the letters. She typed them to make herself seem the victim, posted them locally to avoid suspicion. It was clever, but not clever enough. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a village scandal years ago, when a quiet widow had forged letters to deflect blame for a theft. The ruse had worked until a neighbor noticed her at the post box. Marina's letters, though more sophisticated, had served the same purpose, a smokescreen to hide her guilt. And the sedatives? She asked. The cyanide traces were deliberate? Craddock nodded. The lab confirmed it. Small amounts mixed into the pills to mask the poison's taste. Marina admitted she ground up her sedatives for both murders, knowing they'd dull the flavor. Jason's control over the bottle was his attempt to limit her access, but he didn't check closely enough. Miss Marple's eyes softened with a mix of sympathy and resolve. A tragic chain of events, Inspector. Marina's grief, sparked by Heather's innocent words, led to a desperate act. Ella's curiosity made her a threat, and Jason's love kept him silent. It's a story as old as time, but no less painful. Craddock leaned forward, his expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. You saw it all, didn't you, Miss Marple? The moment Marina reacted at the fate, you knew it wasn't just shock. How do you do it? Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting needles finally moving, their click a steady rhythm. I only see what people show, Inspector. A glance, a word, a hesitation. They tell a story, if you know how to read it. Marina's face, when Heather spoke of 1949, was like a mirror cracking. It told me everything, though it took time to understand why. Craddock stood, tipping his hat. You're a marvel, Miss Marple. The village is lucky to have you. We're closing the case, barring any surprises. Marina's trial will be quiet, her solicitors insisting on it. Jason's likely to get a lighter sentence given his cooperation, but it's a sad end for Gossington Hall. Sad, but necessary, Miss Marple said softly. The truth, however painful, sets things right. After Craddock left, Miss Marple returned to her roses, her pruning shears snipping with care. The village was settling, its rhythm restored, but the scars of the tragedy lingered. She thought of Marina, her beauty shattered by a grief that had consumed her, and Jason, whose love had blinded him to justice. Heather, with her guileless pride, and Ella, with her sharp curiosity, had been caught in a web not of their making. And Giuseppe, fleeing in fear, had carried the weight of what he'd seen. That afternoon, Dolly Bantry returned for tea, her curiosity undimmed. Jane, it's all over the village, she said, settling at the kitchen table. Mrs. Meavy says the new owners of Gossington are a nice family from London, no film stars this time. And the Women's Institute is planning a memorial for Heather, a plaque in the village hall. Feels like we're turning a page, doesn't it? Miss Marple nodded, pouring tea with a steady hand. We always do, Dolly. Villages like ours have a way of healing, though the memories remain. It's the human heart that carries the deepest wounds. Dolly sighed, stirring sugar into her cup. You're right, of course, but to think it all started with that meeting in 1949, Heather, so proud, and Marina, carrying that pain all these years. It's like something out of one of her films. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Life often mimics art, Dolly. Marina played many roles, but this was her most tragic, and Jason, his love, was her shield, but also her undoing. As Dolly prattled on about village plans, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a scandal years ago when a quiet baker had poisoned his rival's bread over a lost contract. The act had been meticulous, but a customer's chance remark had unraveled it. Marina's plan, born of a mother's anguish, had been cleverer, but the truth had surfaced, as it always did in St. Mary Mead. The anonymous letters, the cyanide, the household's tensions, all had been cracks in a facade that could not hold. The evening brought a quiet calm, the village settling into its familiar routine. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting resumed, the pink wool destined for a baby's jacket taking shape under her deft fingers. She thought of Marina's films, with their tales of passion and betrayal, and of Jason's letter, begging her to let go of the past. The human heart, she reflected, was a fragile thing, prone to breaking under the weight of its own sorrows. Yet it was also resilient, capable of healing, given time and truth. As the clock struck 9, Miss Marple closed her notebook, its pages no longer needed. The puzzle was solved, the mirror's cracks laid bare. She recalled a saying from her youth. We all carry cracks, but some let the darkness spill through. Marina's darkness had consumed her, but St. Mary Mead would endure, its secrets safe in the hands of an old woman who saw more than most. With a final snip of her knitting, she smiled, content to let the village settle, knowing the truth had set it free.